I'm gonna make you the host now.
Okay. All right.
And
Meeting is now streaming live.
so if you click that button in the top left, you can view the stream. You can copy the link, so you can tell the students if they want to share it, they can copy that streaming link, and then you also have the option to end live stream.
Okay.
So just do that before you close the Zoom. That's the only thing that you have to do.
Okay. Before I end the Zoom.
So yeah, like, or if you want to,
you mean at the end of
or if you want to like have like personal remarks to your students, maybe end the live stream before that. But whatever.
I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat. Even if they're not on the call yet, will they be able to see that part?
I'm not sure.
Not either. That's weird.
Yeah, but I guess you can just mention it. You can just mention at the start of the review. I guess in terms of like privacy, you should also mention it, that like we are streaming on there's more than likely going to be like 3 people watching.
We address that,
okay, cool.
Your appearance, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. I think then we're good. So I'm back the host now.
And I'll be leaving.
And I'm not going to stop the recording or the live. I'm just going to.
Yeah, I wouldn't even mess with it.
Just myself and come back in about 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. Good luck with your review today, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Hello, Wendy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good,
Look, we're
thanks.
matchy today. God, are these are blue checks? Are those blue or black or?
I have pink and green going on.
Gosh, the coloration on Zoom is interesting then. How are you? Thank you so
Good.
much for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. I haven't done one of these online yet, so this will be.
Really? Well, your audio and visuals are all very good, so.
Okay, good.
You're seeming
I mean,
like,
I'm doing Zoom like 10 hours a day, but I haven't done a review online.
Gotcha. Well, the biggest, I think one of the biggest assets to reviews online are, well, the concept board has been kind of a revelation because it means that you can, I will share the screen to the concept board, but you can follow along. And we've had reviewers with double screens, you know, kind of making notes and sketches on the images on the screen. And the good news is, unlike the Zoom annotations, they actually will stay there so students can go back and ponder them when they're not,
Interesting.
so to speak.
Cool.
Concept board. I hear some other schools are using something called Miro, and that it's even better. But I've kind of come to admire and love, nay, love concept board.
No, it's great that all these tools were kind of there to be discovered during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And so
yeah, I really thought architectural education would actually suffer as a result of the pandemic, but it seems to be chugging along.
well, I mean, it's advantageous that most schools and even our school, which I think was maybe slow to commit to really early integration of digital representation, but as I mentioned in my introductory email, this semester they had full immersion in Rhino after the very first drawing exercise. So arguably, you know, there's a seamlessness. Actually, there are less bumps of resistance in getting those things on hard copy.
Yeah.
Not having to.
I see some of the students are in studio. Are you guys back to teaching?
Well, it's been
in person?
yeah, Tulane has really pushed as much in-person interaction as possible. Of course, with, you know, large lecture classes and things, they've had to be exclusively online. But for studio, everybody fought really hard to get the students back in the studio space because, you know, even if interaction with faculty and reviewers is most easily accommodated online, you know, working there and working with each other and having access to the building's facilities.
It's so important. Yeah, it's so hard to do without.
Yeah, I think it's really critical. And I mean, you know, in my anecdotal kind of conversations with students, I taught the same group, not these students, but the same studio last spring when we were half in person and then half online. And those who I was in contact with told me, but, you know, it wasn't so much that they missed seeing us in the flesh, they missed seeing each other and having a common workspace. And, you know, the motivation and all of that, you know, I don't need to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, all my dearest friends to this day are from my time in undergrad and studio. So it's important to be in the same space.
I thought
bonds
that, you know, last spring when it all sort of hit us like the side of a barn, that it would be a disaster. You know me, I'm old school anyway, and I just thought it would all fall apart and students wouldn't show up to the Zooms, or they wouldn't really be focused. And I was surprised in a positive way. I mean, I kind of became a believer that even with young students, you know, it could work really well. We were kind of there at that time, especially, we were kind of their lifeline, you know, to any society. So if anything, it made them more engaged. I think it's sort of wearing off, you know. I think everybody, including me, is ready to get back into something like normal. But I've been amazed at how well it's gone overall, really.
It's good to hear. I look forward to seeing the work.
Yeah. So let's see, it is 8:58. We're up to 13. I think we should have in the end We have 13 students, 2 reviewers, and Evan and me. That's 15, 17 is what we're shooting for here. We'll give it another couple minutes. We definitely have to wait for Matt. Have you met Matt Griffith ever?
I don't think so.
You would like him. He was a student of mine way long ago, at NC State. I taught him for an early studio, an option studio, and I think I was one of his thesis people. So I know Matt. There he is. Hi, Matt. He's giving us his logo there. Are you not ready for the camera? Ready for your close-up, Matt? He's getting his coffee or something.
I'm on my 3rd cup. It's terrible.
I've got my whole teapot, actually, my tea thermos. So I'm ready to go. We'll be having bathroom breaks, don't worry. All right. So I see Evan, we're up to 15. If we can make sure. Good morning, everybody, students. Hello. Did you get a good night's sleep? Good. Good. All right. Well, whenever Matt clicks in, he must be getting his coffee. I think that's what must be happening. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. Sorry, I'm right on time.
You're right. Nothing to be sorry for. We were just, talking about you behind your back.
Oh my gosh.
Joking.
Well, I heard the whole thing.
Oh, okay. See, that's the beauty of Zoom is that you can spy. All right. Well, without much delay, I want to go ahead and get things started. What I am going to do first is, now that almost everybody is on the call, I have a link. If you want your parents or your friends or whatever to see your review, maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm sending you the YouTube link if you didn't get it from the school or missed that email, since you've been a bit busy the last few days. Please give them that and not our Zoom link, because we want just the people here and invited to be on the Zoom. But they're welcome to watch in real time on that live stream. And by the way, just a reminder, we are all on TV. We're live streaming on YouTube as of now. So this is more of a reminder to me than anybody else to watch our language and our comportment and so forth. Don't do anything that you wouldn't put on a postcard, as my old IT person used to tell me. Okay, so with that, I would really love to introduce our reviewers. I did talk about you all in glowing terms, of course, in absentia beforehand, because I was so excited that you both were able to join us. But I want to welcome, just alphabetically, Matt Griffith, who I've known for many, many years. Both of these individuals are, really the A team in my book. Matt was, I've met Matt first many, many, many years ago. How many years ago? Is it going to make us look too old if we tell them?
I think in 2000.
God, 20 years ago.
21 years.
21 years ago. Matt was a graduate student at the institution where I taught at the time, North Carolina State University, one of my fond alma maters. And I taught him in a couple of studios, I taught him in one studio and then was kind of an advisor for your thesis in some ways, I believe.
That's correct.
I've known him. I mean, he's the kind of person that if he's in a school or any institution, you're going to know Matt, even if you don't have an official connection with him. He's incredibly talented, vibrant, passionate, lively person, fun, funny, kind, talented, incredibly dedicated. He started his own firm in Raleigh. How many years ago?
11.
11 years ago. And in that context, they've done some absolutely beautiful work. It's just always such a pleasure to see your work come out, Matt, and it's gotten many awards, and he's been a teacher. I think I gave you your first teaching gig, didn't I?
Yes.
Take credit for that. So he's an incredibly engaging teacher as well. And so I think as a reviewer, he's a little bit really kind of at the top of my list of people. So I've given you my best in Matt, and also in Oz. Oz Rashidi is, again, someone I've known. Have we known each other for 20 years, or has it been a little bit?
I think 2000 is when I met you as well.
Amazing. We're some of us are getting very old, long in the tooth, as they say. Anyway, Oz went through the program at UVA as a graduate student, and I didn't have the wonderful pleasure of teaching her directly, but she was a student of my former partner in practice, and then she worked with us for a few years. So I got to know her well in that context, and she too is just incredibly talented. She works for Williams Chin now in New York, which is, in my opinion, among the best firms currently working in the United States. And on certain days when I look at certain projects, I think the best. Small office, so to get a slot in that really prestigious firm. You're a project architect now, I believe, are you not?
I'm a project manager.
Project manager in that firm. So she's not only in the firm, but she has quite a lot of responsibility and a leadership role. So she has tremendous experience. She too is incredibly talented and kind and giving and sharing. And so you're in excellent hands today. I'm really happy that both of you were willing to join us.
Thanks for the invite.
And to give your time to these young students. I did send you an email that I think hits the highlights of the project. But just to review, the project is the third of the semester. It's the main project of the semester. It had several phases where the students were exposed to various presentations and tours, if they chose to take them, of some of the archives, the many archives at Tulane. It's quite a flotsam and jetsam bunch. It's a really interesting array of kind of interests that has kind of come about, maybe I think not by design as a collection, but has been opportunistic and appropriate to context. I mentioned some of that in my email, but it includes the largest collection, 7 million, I think, samples of post-larval fish in the world. And people, the researchers all over the world get, believe it or not, these samples in jars sent to them and they come here to look at them and so forth. There's the Hogan Jazz Collection, which is obviously very appropriate to New Orleans, and a number of others that are really have incredible holdings. Right now, they're all kind of located in a variety of places on and off campus, and in many cases, not great spaces. For example, the fish collection is not on campus, and it's in this sort of series of old bunkers, that leak and have issues with HVAC and so on and so forth. So, but it's an incredible wealth that's kind of there, this whole host of hidden gems, that kind of reminds one of curiosity cabinets of old. And so the project imagines that the students are going to, that Tulane has decided to propose a building that puts all of these archives under one roof. So there's obviously an enormous amount of storage that's proposed. It probably is not realistically would meet those needs exactly, but you'll see a lot of portions of plans that are packed with repetitive shelving, which is something that they saw a lot in the introductions of the archives by the directors. But we also are including, what most of the archives don't have, which is a few punctuations of galleries. Some have one larger one, some have several smaller ones, according to their designs and their intentions. And then there's sort of some back of house space for researchers to come and consult the pieces of the collection. visiting researchers. There's some staff offices. You saw the program, so I won't go into it in much more detail, but I want to try to take the weight off our first student so that any questions about the program get kind of fleshed out now. The only other issue is this is, I think, only our second time, our second year with this project, with this curriculum. Last year, the first year, which was such a crazy year, partly for that reason, we lost time, but also partly by intent. It was not a cited project. It was proposed as kind of this is a walled bunker that could kind of go anywhere. And that was by design because, first of all, the next semester these students will take in fall of 2021, next fall, second year, is completely oriented to site and landscape and connections. And I think both of you, Oz and Matt, both sat in on reviews at different points, didn't you? For that project, you came to see Judith's work.
Yep.
Oz, and I think Matt, you've seen that project in my studio, I believe. So, this is sort of the opposite of this is about kind of organizing space, using precedent to help with the kind of organization of space and hierarchy of space. And obviously, these are freshmen. So there's a lot of emphasis just on representation, graphic representation, and tools of representation to aid design process. So, am I missing anything, Evan? Evan is my fabulous, wonderful TA. He's been an incredible partner in all of this. And I truly mean that. As you all know, some TAs are good and then some TAs are awesome. And Evan and I have had enough overlap, but have been complementary enough in skills and experience that I think it's for me anyway, it's been a really rewarding experience. Do you want to say a few words, Evan, about the students or the studio or anything before we jump in?
Yeah, I think a good way to look into this is kind of a jump from hand drawing as we started this semester into a more digital realm. So these are early explorations into using Rhino and modeling and 2D graphics. And so it's been fun solving some of those problems early on with technology and getting everybody into the swing of things, and then jumping from an abstract projects earlier in the semester into this actual design space. So hopefully everybody's excited about what they have now.
I think that the learning curve has been huge. I don't know, Oz, I actually had a question from one of the first year graduate students recently in my seminar that, or it's a lecture class, but seminar size, said that Rhino is something that's been espoused strongly by the school by virtue of a couple of new faculty hires who just, came from big offices in New York and just think it's the program. Are you all using Rhino, or is it?
Yeah, we use it for all our 3D visualization. It's been hugely helpful. And it's great that everyone we hire now knows how to use it. So we rely on it pretty heavily these days to study what we're making three-dimensionally. But clients also demand so many renderings now for every single space. And Rhino is a great way to kind of feed into that process. So I think it's amazing. We don't produce drawings using Rhino because Revit is sort of the industry standard, but Rhino's heavily used for just visualizing what we're doing.
How about you, Matt? Are you familiar with it? Do you use it at all in your?
Yeah, a couple of people in our office use it, and I know more and more people at the school are starting to use it. We actually just hired somebody from Perkins and Will, the local office here that used to be Freelon, and she's really, really good with it and prefers it to anything else. So I think everybody else in the office is jealous of her, so we're starting to make that shift.
Well, I hope that you'll be impressed with what the students show you and how they've used it. And if anything, like Evan kind of alluded to, and Oz, you too, is that if you build a model of your project, you can take perspectives anywhere and everywhere. And it's almost the problem is choice and making good choices about, what views you really need to look at and study and how exactly to place the camera, yada, yada. I mean, I've learned a lot, not about how to use the program, but how it works and how you can manipulate it, hopefully to best effect for designers. But I think,
I think that point you made is a good one, though. With so much of the technology today, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah.
And it does kind of trend you towards buildings that have an infinite number of details because every condition's different, which is actually a very difficult thing to make happen in the world.
absolutely, absolutely. So, I hope and think you'll be impressed with the way they've used this to produce their drawings. This program is almost exclusive. Like they don't even have Adobe Suite products yet. They're not using Photoshop and things like, I mean, they have it, but we're not pushing that. So even rendering and things have all been through Rhino. All right. So without further ado, students, have I forgotten anything? Should we just get started? Okay. So we're going to start with Talia Pomp's project. And by the way, if you haven't yet kind of familiarized yourself, have you familiarized yourself with the concept board at all? Things are, the drawings are in sort of 2 columns per student. And they start with what we called 3.1 sub-project, which was the curation of 3 objects to draw in Rhino to start to get familiarized both with the collections and also specific artifacts. And then of course we were saving them as for entourage at this phase to place in drawings, in their final drawings. Then we went into a phase of precedent analysis and diagramming to get a sense of figure and field. That in our studio's case, students had a choice of, had to pick from a list of 2 sets of precedents. One were kind of visionary plans like No Stop City or Haydock's Diamond Sea Museum. There were a few others that you'll hear about. And then they had to pick from a list of built projects. So we had everything from Sanaa's Silverin School of Management to Palace of the Assembly to, oh, I'm blanking. We had Exeter Library, but I don't think that ever came through as any of the with any of the final projects. Zumthor's Kunsthaus. So we had a few, kind of mainly museum-like or grand assembly space type precedents. Students picked 2, they immersed themselves in those 2, and through a process of kind of iteration and diagramming, they ended up really settling on 1 as their kind of main influence, and then the project sort of took off from there. That's when we introduced program and site and so on. So I'm just giving you a kind of a sort of the chronology of how the projects have evolved, so the students don't bear that burden. So with that, I do want to go ahead and turn it over to Talia. And you have the floor.
Oh, thank you. My name is Talia. My precedent was Palace of the Assembly by Lake Louisiana. And we started out making learning about plan diagrams. And from there, from my plan diagram made of shelves and sort of smaller gallery spaces, I took like the asymmetrical composition with the main gallery kind of off center, and then transformed that into a more of a plan with back of house space and different sized galleries to showcase the artifacts that I studied in the first assignment at the top. Yeah, and then the galleries feature higher ceilings and different levels of filled with pedestals of different objects. The smaller one has like the biggest object, and then it goes down from there. And then I drew the perspective drawings of the 3 main galleries, and then to just show more of the space and how it's experienced by visitors. And then the last one is like immersed in the shelves.
The top left perspective is of that large cylindrical,
Circular, yeah.
which was the assembly hall in the Champ de Gare. And then you have a smaller gallery in the top right. which is this long thin one, correct? In the
That's
plan?
the entry gallery, yeah.
Gallery. And then this is a kind of a typical view within the shelving, right?
Mhm.
And then is this your small orthogonal,
Yeah, this is the smallest one.
which is up in this corner, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
And I know the project was purposefully kind of an internalized project. But can you talk just a little bit about entry? I see the two double doors in the front, what looks like a little desk and chair. But a little bit just about entry and sequence and how people might move through and what your thoughts are with that.
Yeah, so the entry kind of leads into that long gallery, and then kind of like you're like invited in through these tall shelves, which then open up to more gallery spaces, kind of like hidden within the shelves, and then just through and around. And also, since it's an archive space, I was imagining like if you were looking for something specific, you would be led to where exactly it would be, or you can go through the galleries and through the shelves into the spaces. Yeah.
So something like that, where you kind of move into this arrival space and then you find the spaces that are really the negative space of the contours of the shelves.
Yeah.
Between the contours of the shelves. That's cool. Is this kind of loading back of house stuff here?
Yeah, that's the receiving area, and then to the right is like a research room.
Great.
And then the lower left is office space and meeting rooms.
And is there any difference between shelves that are spaced this far apart and shelves that are spaced this far apart?
No, there's this window at the bottom that sees out to the Mississippi River, so I wanted to like showcase it more with the further apart shelves.
And is the land is this way?
Yeah.
Okay.
I should have mentioned that in my intro. Yeah. So just off to the north in this plan, if north were up, but you know, that's never the case in New Orleans quite. But at any rate, there's a road along the Mississippi River. Everything you're seeing is this gray hatch is water. It's the Mississippi River. So the building is fully out on the water, but just out of the frame of the drawing at the top, there is a kind of a access road. And also there is a connection at this point to the Crescent City Park, the part of it that's been built with the David Adjaye Bridge nearby and so forth, if you're familiar with it. So it was basically just laid out that this would be the entry plaza. So it's the deck that pedestrians would enter through to the building. And then this section here on the north side of the building was the loading dock area where goods and garbage and so forth would be coming in and out with vehicular access. So that's all the projects.
Can
you explain some of the logic of how you organize the rest of the back of house space, why you chose to use the corners you did for that program?
Most of that logic was taken from my precedent. So like the edges of the plan of the Palace of the Assembly were more like separated from the central part. So that was the inspiration for that. And it also just like made sense and like fit for my project.
What direction is north? Just curious.
I'm not sure.
I mean, it's sort of it's more like Riverside. We talk about Riverside, uptown, downtown. But the Mississippi River is fully there. So like the traffic of ships and boats runs that way. This is sort of the land side, and this is way down in the kind of, it's really in the Bywater. It's past the Marigny, isn't it, Evan?
Yes, it's in the Bywater, and the north is technically like slightly up to the left.
Okay. So like that.
Yeah, basically. I think that's
Yeah.
right.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I'll jump in. I think the precedent's a really great precedent project, and I think you understood some things about it. You know, that there's kind of this regular frame or module to the building, and then things can happen in a free way inside. You know, that really is kind of common in a lot of Corbusier's mid-career stuff, where you have a grid of columns in most cases, and then important spaces or objects, whether they be, in this case, the assembly hall or stairs or offices or wherever they might be, get to be these kind of pods of space that are shaped and located in a way that's kind of indifferent to, but always thoughtfully related to the column grid. And so I think you've worked that pretty well, where you have a kind of standard module or rhythm of shelves that you're able to interrupt periodically to create these more important spaces on the interior. And generally, I like that idea of finding your way through a field of shelves and then finding spaces where there are openings in the shelves that, if I understand you correctly, are also correlated with surprising moments of light. For me, the one kind of low-hanging fruit that I think you kind of missed, if I look at the section, is when you build a pier, you start with a grid of columns. And those columns, unless I'm missing something in your project, don't seem to come up through the space of your depot or the museum. And I think that, you know, it might have been too direct of a correlation with the Corbusier precedent, but I think it might have been a nice place to start, just to kind of see what happens if that structure continues up above the deck level and supports the roof and maybe supports a really broad kind of interesting roof that you can then place program underneath, shelves underneath, other storage devices underneath, and begin to puncture the roof to bring light in certain ways. It might have kind of given you a way of organizing the space that feels like it's more a part of the architecture, right? And less a part of just being shelves in the space, because I think in some ways what you've done feels that way. The other thing that really stands out, a couple other things that really stand out to me about the arrangement of spaces. I know practically the back of house access would want to be obviously close to the road, but it's interesting to me that you chose to have it, you know, kind of fill the majority of the shore side of the project. And, you know, you would imagine there aren't very many openings or windows or other generous things on that wall. And so you would end up with a very blank facade. I notice you even have in this corner a shelf that's like right up against the wall, also arguing for the fact that this is probably an entirely solid facade. That's not inherently bad, but it means your project really becomes about people moving down this edge. I assume having some really cool view. I might have put this just a little bit past so that they could go out past the structure and really have that view, and then enter on the side. And if that's the case, I think that is potentially beautiful. But I might have considered having the roof just kind of continue all the way across, especially if these columns are coming up from below. You actually kind of enter under a covered space and then make much more of this moment where you pierce from outside space to conditioned space. I think it's a little underserved right now. And that's another thing I think that the Corbusian precedent does so well, is there's such a mix of indoor and outdoor space. And you enter the architecture well before you enter anything that you would consider an interior, if that makes sense. And I think you would have the same opportunity here as well. So in other words, just dislodging the relationship between the roof plane and the enclosed space below, I think would have helped it a lot and created a more generous entry. That way your entrance happens here, and you kind of move through a field of columns into a space.
Yeah, I agree that it's a really great precedent, and I like what you've built off of it. I think the kind of intensity of the experience of moving through these tight clusters of shelving to discover gallery spaces is really wonderful. I think the organization of what is back of house could be a lot stronger if you really sort of intensified one edge. You know, this the bathrooms right here, I think is a poor choice, because you could make more of your entrance and the generosity and the kind of open views out by removing this piece and really thinking about the kind of solid service space edge, whether it's this zone here or this zone here, and freeing up some more spaces for galleries as a result, or even just really thinking about the orientation of the shelving and what you discover when you get to the end of a row like this, for example. Does it have to be solid wall, or are you framing actual views out? And then the other opportunity is to really start playing with this roof form. I think, you know, you've stopped at a very flat roof line, but the intensity of this experience and arriving at this space should yield something magnificent once you're there, in terms of the volume of space you inhabit, not just light pouring in, but really exploring how you sculpt that space three-dimensionally. I think that would be the logical next step for your project, to really push the form further in terms of what arrival means in those spaces and what the volumetric experience can be. And that starts to inform the overall form you're making on the waterfront as a result.
I feel, yeah, I don't want to come off as defensive, but I feel the need to step in and take responsibility for the whole teaching team to some degree. Like I said, this scheme didn't have this project didn't have a site last year, and I almost felt like that was better. The students received the program and site 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So all the drawings you're seeing have happened since then. And so it was sort of, we almost had no choice. There was some talk, some reviewers or some professors adopted a 30 by 30 grid that they just laid over everything of columns, which of course some kind of columnar structure would be there. The students were given that kind of those site section templates for the ground, some of which were wrong. And the filings had no reference to that 30 by 30 grid. And so at a certain moment, you know, Evan and I kind of made the judgment call, look, just, of course it would have structure, but let's forget about that right now. It's a bridge too far. Some students did talk about recently kind of canopies over the plaza, but again, you know, not knowing anything about how they would be structured or how thick the roofs would be, we had to just give rules of thumb. So all I'm saying is I want to take some responsibility for the fact that you're going to see roofs that all look the same, and it took a lot to get there. There were some kooky things, but that's not because it's not a reflection of their lack of interest or creativity, and they'll get to that. It's just, we had 3 weeks, you know.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. But I think, you know, the section becomes such an important thing as you move into your next studio, and the precedents you're looking at are so much about the section created as well. And if you're doing a project that's all about that internal experience, then really thinking about the moments that are highlighted, both in terms of volume and scale versus moments that are really about kind of the individual experience, tight spaces, constricted spaces, and the play of those two things. Those are very powerful architectural tools in terms of the experience you create for the user.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
with that short of an amount of time, you know, the review today becomes as much about what would you keep doing if you kept working on this. You know, I think a lot of the points that Oz and I were making are really going back to that precedent and making sure that that you glean from it what's significant. And it's not for the purpose of imitating it, although that's not a bad thing to do with great architecture until you learn your own way. But it's, you know, it's more just to be able to assess, you know, these are kind of the key things. This is what makes this a compelling project and creates surprising space. And, you know, just making sure you're attempting to accomplish those same sorts of things. I also think it makes total sense that you didn't do this now that I know it's been 3 weeks, but, you know, the one thing in your renderings that really stood out to me is that all of the shelving units are the same, and they look like shelves. And I think in a space like this, you would eventually get to the point where you're so intimately familiar with the collection that you would be designing little vitrines and certain lighting conditions and relationships between skylights and little pedestals or whatever it might be, to display some of the most significant things in a special way, and use that to guide people through the space. And on the way, they would see, you know, just the myriad other things that are in the collection that might be displayed in a less important way. And you could use that to start to create a path or a series of paths or a loop or something like that through the space that would draw people in. From the moment they walk in the door, there's like a first destination inside that they're drawn to, and you kind of pull them back into that main space that you want them to be in. That would take a lot of thought, and more thought than 3 weeks would have afforded, for sure, but something to be thinking about.
Yeah, all of these comments just made me really excited for future projects because I like all of those ideas are really awesome, and learning more about the precedents just made me excited for learning more. So thank you.
Some students did, and Talia was one, kind of broke the rules a little bit and added windows in various locations. She has this big one out facing the Mississippi. But in some ways, I think that the use of skylights alone over the, first of all, it would be more in keeping with the precedent, which doesn't have a lot of exterior breaks. All light comes from above, and it's very dark actually in that courtyard space. But seems like the lighting above the galleries that she's included in the sections would also tend to kind of draw, you would be drawn to the light like moths maybe.
Right.
Yep. Which are the main gallery spaces.
Yeah.
And I do think that the form that I think Oz drew on the roof of the section, that's another important thing to remember, that if you can kind of deepen the length of the tunnel that light's coming through and give it a shape or contour, and sometimes even create conditions where you can't see the sky, but light's getting in, that will that will allow you to really control light and kind of create these really beautiful moments, rather than a harsh or stark ray of light that's coming through. You're creating this diffuse light that comes down from above. A really good example of that, it's so awkward to mention it because Oz works there, is the museum in Philadelphia that y'all did.
The Barnes Foundation.
Yeah, the Barnes Foundation, that has that beautiful light baffle over the entire lobby. It's just an incredible example of that. You can never see out, but the quality of light it creates is really amazing.
Well, if there are no more comments here, we should probably move along. We'll go a little long on these early ones to get through kind of these various issues, but we'll pick up as we go.
Thank you, Talia. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Jordan.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jordan. And when I first started, I guess like the 3.1, I was mainly like attracted to a curation of like Mardi Gras themed items or artifacts because I am like a native of Louisiana. But after that, the precedent that I decided to go with is No Stop City. And really like what I found kind of interesting about it was just like enjoying this aspect of like organized density throughout the shelving, but it's kind of interrupted by these organic like curves throughout it. And I feel like it really fit to my idea of like exploration through an archive. With like you kind of go on an adventure where you like wander through these shelves and you discover these little pieces of space just scattered throughout, and they're highlighted by different skylights that I have above them. And that was just a lot of what my process was concerned about, especially when it came to different ceiling heights and ceiling levels. So you can still have like a sense of connectedness through the archive, but still work with this density of the shelves in between.
So the wiggle lines in your plan, what happens at those moments?
Those are just walls, and it pretty much just highlights the gallery spaces. Those are what like interrupts the shelving for open space.
I'll come down and show some of the perspectives that show some of their. So Jordan went the route of many small gallery interruptions rather than one or two big gallery spaces, which I think is arguably in keeping with her precedent. Or certain depictions of her precedent. There's so many different images of No Stop City. The first thing is to choose which one to follow.
Yeah, and honestly, I particularly like the left perspective I have because I feel like it's like you see like the little object at the end of the aisle, which is like kind of how I imagine people like finding partially the gallery spaces. It's like you see down this long aisle of shelves and there's this little like pop of an object at the end that you want to walk toward.
In your kind of axon with no roof, it looks like all of the kind of curved intervention walls are the same height as all the other walls. But then in your section, it looks like they might be shorter. Is one of those true?
Yeah, they actually are shorter. They should be shorter by about at least, yeah, because my shelving I think is like 18 and 6 inches and the
Okay.
curved walls are 12.
Okay. And it may just be a trick of the axon that maybe they are shorter in the axon. Actually, they are. I can see a couple that look like they're shorter.
I think what throws me in terms of where you went from the precedent study to this plan development is the addition of these long linear walls. Because that plan really implies the freedom to move in all directions, right? There's a grid that's a structural imposition, but there aren't really impediments in your way in terms of as far as the precedent goes. But these long linear walls, I think it's an added system that actually really kind of disrupts the flow through the space and the experience of the space. And I think you could do entirely without it because you have the structure of the shelving and you have the freeform gallery moments through that. But the whole kind of exploration of space is constantly blocked by these long linear walls. So I'm curious to know where they came from and why you felt it was important to have them.
Mainly just I thought that they mimicked the piece of the precedent because there is kind of in the, I don't know, I guess in the precedent image above, it just does have this like really, it has the little pieces in between, but then it has these really long lines of, yeah, of like dotting. And I did try to use the kind of curved walls to break through it so you could still move through it, but they definitely still,
Yeah, I think you could be more aggressive about that than in terms of allowing people to kind of make their way through the plan where these curved interruptions happen by having the curves break through the walls more. But I think, I can imagine this project where the back of house spaces are actually the structure. So, it's like a poche that's holding up the roof. And then you don't need these linear walls at all. And it's all about shelves and the moments that are broken up by galleries.
I think as a clarification, the horizontal elements they are walls in the space in terms of space definers, but they're also long shelves. And there was a moment where, the 9,000 whatever, however many square feet and lineal feet of shelves, it was massive. They were kind of told to maintain about a 70% solid shelf versus open space ratio. And so there was a moment, especially in the program and the kind of idea of a real plan came along, that all the shelves kind of disappeared. And so I was, again, a little bit of the Nazi of like, we need more shelving. But I completely agree that these horizontal ones probably could have been broken more at different points.
Yeah, I wonder if like the shelving could actually be intensely kind of wrapped around these pieces to gain. Sorry, I'm not very good at drawing in this program, but the back of house spaces could be lined with shelves and heavily reinforced that way, allowing for some of these to go away so you can kind of explore the space more. Because right now you basically have to go all the way to the ends to move across, which is very limiting versus the kind of free open plan that you have studied as a precedent.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that. And I really like the idea of these becoming much more distinct objects, so that you really have three things. You have the squiggly walls, you have the grid of shelves, and you every now and then have these objects. I think one of the really nice objects you've made is the one at the entry. I actually think this is a really beautiful entrance. I do wish a little more was happening at the wall, where you actually come, from outside to inside. But this moment where you walk in, you're greeted, kind of the back of house bathroomy stuff is behind the desk. There's this kind of gathering area, and then you kind of wrap around this mysterious kind of edge, and you would all of a sudden encounter this crazy system of shelves and squiggles. I mean, I think would really be very beautiful. And I would, once you get around there, like Oz was saying, and just to build on that, I would make every effort to get all of the supporting program in these really distinct kind of zones. No L-shaped things, just all rectangles floating in there, and then everything else is either a shelf or a curved wall. I think the reason I was asking about the height of the curved walls is going back to this discussion about how light's brought in. When I look at your section, which I'll go up to or down to wherever it was, yeah. This sort of move here, bringing light in that is aligned with or in allegiance with the kind of bays between these straight walls that I think we're all saying might go away. That feels like that's one way to bring light into the space, but I wonder if it wouldn't be more engaging to actually have the curved walls somehow come through the roof plane and catch light and bring light down, and then actually have the shelves be shorter than the curved walls, so that when you're looking across a whole space, you can see these curved walls going up through, and you can kind of use those as a wayfinder in the space across the kind of sea of shelves to find different nodes or important spaces. And that, if they were a different color, like slightly different colors or different material, they could start to become objects themselves in the space that you're then drawn to. And then these more important objects that you've set against the wall, against these curved walls, would take on more significance. It might be a smarter way to use those walls, because they feel in the plan hierarchically, they feel much more important than the grid of shelves. And to have them be shorter and to have light come in over the shelves instead of in relation to those spaces that the curved walls make seems a little backwards to me.
Yeah, in essence, the thing that breaks the system is what's special, and that's what you want to kind of push to really influence the space and shape it.
Yeah, it would be really interesting too, because light, I mean, if you brought light in on one side, only one side of each of those curved walls, my gut would be to do the north side of each of those walls, so you're not getting a harsh direct light into whatever sort of light monitor is up there. You'd also end up with a dark side of the wall and a light side of the wall, which I think could be really beautiful.
By the way, since we're really focused on precedents and they're really building their visual library literacy, et cetera, if you have specific precedents, I can go hunting for them and plop them on the concept board just as I'm thinking of, there's a, can't remember which Swiss architect, but there's a ski lodge that has a series of these kind of popping up skylights that I'm thinking of, but I don't know. If you can think of particular examples anywhere along the way, I think that helps the students too.
Well, and I think, I think this conversation about the precedents is so interesting, and I think what this, hopefully the students will take away from it is, I notice your plan is very, very similar. I can tell how you derived your plan from the precedent almost directly when I look at it. There are certain walls, like this wall is almost in the exact same place in the precedent as it is in your project. Same with this one. Others had to move to accommodate back a house program or whatever. It makes me wonder if you internalized kind of the lessons and the ideas in the project, or in contrast to that, if you were more interested just in the patterns and the kind of shape of what was there. But I think with precedent, it's so interesting, instead of getting bogged down in the specifics and trying to do exactly what the precedent does in a literal way. I think it's always nice to learn the lessons. And in this case, there is a really homogeneous field condition with these special moments that kind of interrupt it and cause a disruption in that system. And those things immediately become the most important thing. And so the experience you have in the architecture should probably be elevated in those locations as well, which is one way to do that would be to bring light in those locations. As we were talking about, there would be other ways to do it as well. But just to remember that lesson, when you're looking at a precedent, always ask yourself, well, what's the big idea here?
Yeah, we used to always, when given a precedent, spend weeks diagramming that precedent, so that you're not just looking at the literal version of the precedent, but doing layers and layers of studies over it, where you pull out structure, you pull out, I don't know, like volumes of space, whatever, and in a way that starts to create a more abstract collage of that precedent, and you start to sort of pull specific ideas out of it. I think I'm not sure if that happened, Wendy, in terms of these precedents or not. I know there's no time.
Really compressed,
Yeah.
really compressed. And I mean, I would say that there were certain things that were piled on really late that frankly were surprises to most of the faculty, including myself. And so we were kind of scrambling, to get the best lessons and to for sure just have the students achieve a degree of completion and thoroughness and well-drawn scheme.
Yeah, and you've thrown in a whole new program that has to be mastered in that period too. So I think
it was a surprise, because like I said, last year it was sort of proposed as like this building could be anywhere. There were no windows really even like allowed. And even when the students were presented with the site here, it was sort of proposed as well. This thing could be taken off on a barge and moved somewhere else, so like,
yeah.
So they were given a site, but sort of discouraged from responding to it, which I think is there were a number of.
We'll just pretend there's no site. It's fine.
Better to do it that way. Although at least they have learned, kind of the rudiments of how to draw an entry plaza
and sections. I think that's really
and the
great
support. So it's gotten a lot less abstract than the final drawings last year, which were just black at the bottom, black at the top, and then whatever was going on, and black on the sides and everything that was going on the inside. But at the same time, that raised a lot of complications and opportunities that really were almost impossible to fully deliver on. So I'm not surprised by the kind of, things coming up. And I think it's great to talk about them as sort of projections into what's coming next and the various, kind of facets of architecture that we couldn't really get into here, but they will.
Yeah.
So I don't want to discourage the sophistication of the conversation, but just to contextualize it a little bit. Okay.
Right.
Did you have something else to say, Matt?
Oh, no, I think I'm good. I just noticed there's an alligator in the section, which seems appropriate to Louisiana.
You'll find pelicans and kind of like manatees that have swum north, I guess, from Florida.
Yeah. Yep.
Creatures going on in various places. All right. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Yeah,
Thank
Jordan.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is Alex.
Hello, how y'all doing?
Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Alrighty.
Alrighty.
So my precedent was Sanaz over in School of Management and Plus Design. And I really love this precedent just because I just love the those small little breakout rooms and the simplicity of it. I feel like it's a very disciplined, well thought out design. And so I wanted to replicate that same feeling when in my design. Except the only difference is I wanted to use as much space as possible to fill it up with shelving. So what I did was I kind of made my 120 by 120 foot square full of shelving and focused on stereotomic, taking out space rather than putting space in. And so you see in my plan, all the shelving, you enter in through a large exhibit, and you then walk through a hallway to another smaller exhibit. From there, you would walk through shelving down into a smaller exhibit as well. From there, you could walk around the edges or through. This is the research room right here. It's broken away from the rest of the museum, offices and bathrooms and loading spaces at the top. And with my perspectives, the first one looks through the research room. The second one looks through right at the entrance, the biggest gallery. The third one on the left looking through a hallway, squeezing through shelving. And the fourth one looks at the second biggest exhibit. And I'm kind of like a history buff, so I was really inspired by like the Mari School, which is the Middle American Research Institute. So there is a theme throughout my whole entire exhibit with specifically to Latin American, ancient Latin American artifacts. So, yeah.
Can you tell us just a little more about the precedent? Because I'm less familiar with it. What was it called again?
Sanaz Zollverein School of Management and Design.
Okay.
I think your approach is very clear, and the organization of space is good. I think one thing your precedent has, which you would benefit from, is just kind of the celebratory sort of corner space. I wonder if, I know you have shelving quotas to meet, but it seems that experientially at some point you want to reach a space that really kind of opens up to the outside. There's sort of an evenness to the experience of all these spaces right now because they're always surrounded in a similar fashion by shelves. So I think as a next step, you would want to push this so that each space can feel a little more unique and allow it to engage the facade and different views, perhaps. I know we're not supposed to talk about site, but that's ultimately kind of what will make each of these galleries special, right? They're each oriented towards a different perspective, a different view. They can have a different spatial quality, different lighting, et cetera, so that something distinguishes them from the rest of this experience. That then becomes something that can help further the section as well, which you're well on the way to doing in terms of the skylights and moments of punctuation. But as these moments engage the corners of the building, I think it starts to inform what can happen with a facade potentially. I know I'm not supposed to talk about that, but
It's to like stifle the conversation. Take ownership.
Every time you say the word facade, we're going to hit a buzzer.
We can't help it. We're architects.
No. I mean, it's all fair as long as you know what they had to work with, and that's all.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting comment, Alex, that, because you've kind of given that priority of great space and view to the meeting room. So it's understandable that that was almost the first perspective you did. And yet that's sort of restricted to just certain individuals who use the space. But the idea that that large picture window out over the Mississippi for the work, for the researchers could have, actually continued to encompass, and characterize at least one edge of that gallery, if not the full corner. That's a really interesting idea. So Alex was one of the first to break the window rule, in other words, he really wanted.
Good for you.
Given that he had it in hand and knew what to do and put it in the right place, I was like all for it. And so I think that, yeah, again, with another week and a half, even, that kind of idea would have been a great addition.
I think I think your perspectives are really good. I really do love the one in the research room where you are looking out at the Mississippi. I think keeping the walls of that space solid on the interior so that that's a complete surprise when you get in there, I think would be really, really beautiful. And in that way, you don't break the window rule from the main space. It's only from that one little room. You've done a good job with what I was talking about on the first project, where you've started, I mean, you didn't have a lot of time, but you've started to think about the ways different things are displayed and how certain things would have hierarchy over others. That lower right perspective, I think, is very nice. In showing that some things are mounted on walls, some things are stored, kind of archive style on shelves, other things are on little daises, whatever. So I think that's really good. And you've associated natural light with those spaces that are given to those more important objects, which I think all those instincts are right on. That lower right perspective, by the way, is a great example of how not to make roof openings, where you can just read the unnatural thinness of the roof plane. There's no curb around it or no contour to a light well or something like that. And I know you didn't have a lot of time, but I hope all you guys will continue to investigate different ways of controlling and directing light into a space, sometimes indirectly. I think that space would be really beautiful with a more hushed type of light that's from a more mysterious source, and where you really can't see the sky. The one thing I'm having I lied. I am actually familiar with the precedent. I just didn't recognize it from what on my screen at least is a blurry plan right now. It's a really cool project. The one thing that's so different about it than what you've done, and I don't know that it's your fault, I think it's more in nature of the program you're working with, is the majority of the space is open on that main level plan in that precedent, and there are discrete objects that house certain programs, 3 kind of back of house support pieces, and then the auditorium. And because there's so much open space, those really feel like objects in the space. And anything else in the space, like display or shelving or seating or whatever, is much lower than the ceiling height. And because of the nature of how many shelves you're required to have, your space is in many ways the opposite, where it's primarily in a figure ground, it would primarily be dark space, not open space. And you're carving out these little open spaces. So I hope you're aware of that significant difference. But I agree, if you look at it that way with the comments that I think some of those negative spaces where shelves are missing could be more well located with relationship to exterior walls. And even the kind of sequence of spaces that you move through to get from one to the other, I think could, with more time, could be developed a little more thoughtfully, even to the extent where you start to, maybe you start to create a little more space here and here, just to connect this space with this space. I agree, probably these shelves go away. So this has a kind of corner condition. But it's where your precedent doesn't actually help you. One other thing I noticed though in the precedent, most of these things feel like discrete zones of shelves so they feel like objects, right? This guy here feels a little shapy. That's a technical term we use in North Carolina. This zone of shelves, it feels like it's not like the other things. Everything else in the space, whether it's a piece of program or a kind of field of shelves, is a discrete rectangle that which your precedent kind of nails that every time. That one piece on the plan north edge, feels a little out of character in that regard. And if you were to think about these things, when you start thinking about these things as blocks, they can start to kind of pinwheel or slip and create these moments where you can kind of slide in between two when they overlap each other, and then find your way out diagonally, And so there's moments like this, where two pure rectangles just kind of slip from each other is how you can start to connect one negative space to another. But I think in general you got a lot of it right. And again, those perspectives, from of the ones we've seen today, they're pretty convincing that you're really thinking about this well.
And I think one way you're starting to get at the precedent more in terms of this open plan is by defining a larger volume than what the shelves define spatially, right? And I think you could push that a lot further by really lifting that roof up so that the first thing that's perceived is the overall shell of the building. You feel that entire space. And then these shelves are really kind of secondary divisions within space. So I think your instincts are kind of there because you're holding the shelves down a certain dimension. But is anything restricting the volume of building you're making? Nothing, right? So imagine if your roof was suddenly 20 feet higher than what you've drawn. Then you really have that kind of overall form, and you're exploring within it, and these shelves become a secondary kind of structure of space.
I love that idea. And the opportunity that would give you if I'm going to draw the objects in the space lower so we can pretend the roof is a lot higher. So I'm on the section down here. If all of the program elements and shelves were half the height of the space or something like that, that would give you the opportunity to not only, bring the light monitor up, but also bring it down into the space over this moment and create a really localized moment of light that when you're standing, way over here, looking and able to read the entire space, you would see those things hanging from the ceiling as objects that are kind of suspended over the open spaces and between the objects that are on the ground level, which I think would be a really nice section development.
Do you have any more final comments here before we move along?
Nice work.
Really nice. Well presented, both in your words and in your drawings. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Chester is next. Are you with us, Chester?
Hello,
Hey, how are you?
doing well. So
Here.
my precedent was the Kunsthaus Bregenz by Peter Zumthor, and it's a museum itself, and so that lended for a really good exploration of the building and was really helpful. Some of the ideas that I wanted to explore were the ceiling and how it's basically these muted panels of light, and they cover the entire ceiling kind of throughout the structure, and then how the walls were these very simple and refined solid forms that kind of sat towards the side of the building. So moving to my diagram, I wanted to incorporate the walls in a way that was very direct, because one of the things I appreciated was kind of how efficient the building was itself. It really was minimalist in nature, and so that's something I've carried into the diagram. And I came up with this rule set to orient the shelves, so I had them repeat into the center gallery space. And moving from there to the plan, I thought about where to place different blocks of program. And I thought about having the sides as kind of the main programmatic areas, and then the center as a more open gallery space. The center gallery has a group of floating walls that are really like gallery walls to accommodate for like hanging paintings and stuff like that, and some pedestals that allow for an ease of like being able to move through the space freely and comfortably. And the entry also is kind of an idea that you're like leaded towards the gallery space, kind of getting an introduction into what you're going to see in the middle of the space, just as a preview. Additionally, I wanted to make sure that the sections and perspectives kind of gave an insight into how you would experience the space walking through it as you would seeing a gallery. And so that's why I chose to incorporate the hanging ceilings or the hanging gallery walls with the ceiling. So you get an idea of how it would look as a real space.
Do you have any, is the ceiling everywhere, and is it artificially lit, or are there openings in the roof, holes in the roof somewhere?
Yeah, so they're spaced, or they're offset from each other about 2 inches. And then there's a lighting fixture within that, and it's kind of like a muted panel that's very, it's very similar to what happens in the Kunsthausbregens. So it's offset, but it does have artificial lighting there.
And are you using these pieces of program like the 3 walls that support Kunsthausbregens?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where got that transition, is to kind of have blocks of program where those walls were.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's first of all, you seem to have understood the precedent well in terms of how you've described it, and I think the moment in your project where you most successfully use what you learned from it is at the entry, where you come in and one of those walls kind of blocks your way and forces you to kind of make a decision about where you're headed. The other pieces of program, with the exception of the kind of conference room desk area on the south wall, they really kind of depart significantly from how Bregenz works, where they're becoming, objects like this are becoming not wall-like at all. They're more volumetric, and ones like this are suddenly touching the exterior wall with there's no space between the object and the wall and the exterior wall. And even here with these little pieces, you seem to imply that that this volume is up against the wall. Same thing with your back of house space. A little bit the same with this one wall here that's inserted. And I kind of, it's challenging, but working with an idea is always challenging. I kind of wish you had really pushed yourself to make those things feel as much like distinct walls as possible. The other thing in Kunsthausbregens is that those 3 walls are the load-bearing structure for the building. The skin, the perimeter wall, and the skin have nothing to do with carrying the load of anything other than the skin itself, which is partially supported by the slab edge. So thinking of those objects and arranging them in a way that not only partition space the way you want to, and has people kind of moving around those objects to find back of house stuff or supporting program is one thing, but also starting to think of them as structure. I think would help you conceptually with the way you do this. Also, when we get into the middle here, I really want something super special to happen. I mean, I think just looking at the whole concept board, most students had the instinct to poke holes in the roof, mainly because this is such a broad floor plate that it will become either incredibly dark or incredibly fluorescent in the middle space, because it will have no choice but to be artificially lit. So I really, you had the instinct to put these special walls here that display and kind of make the central gallery space. I think that's nice, roughly in the middle of the space, but I think it needs something other than those special screens, and I think potentially needs some natural light. One thing I've noticed, just looking for those screens and the perspectives, it's also really important to think about going over to this lower right. Let me see which one's best. Well, either of these right-hand perspectives. I think it's really important to think about the interface between the screens and the ceiling grid. And right now, these what look like supports for the screens, for the panel part of the screen, they don't seem to have any relationship that would allow them to kind of move up through the glass ceiling and connect to something. And so I think, to me, there's a lot of evidence there that there's a lot more work that needs to happen in that central space. That could be a place where the ceiling grid is interrupted. Those panels could actually go up into an opening where the ceiling grid is interrupted. I mean, I think there are a lot of different possibilities there, but yeah.
I'm going to imagine that this ceiling grid is completely full of light and your light source, and that you don't need those punctuations necessarily. But where I would push this is, I think these hanging gallery walls are sort of antithetical to everything else that's going on in the project. And instead, I would push for you to really use these surfaces as your gallery walls, and work towards kind of maintaining the abstractness of these planes, and thinking about that as where display should happen, similar to what happens in the precedent, because that just intensifies the diagram and maintains its integrity. But these objects to me are completely superfluous. I understand that you want something to happen in the center of the space, but that can help inform how you place these boxes as a result, or even your shelves. But as soon as I start seeing a bunch of little doors along these surfaces, it sort of ruins the diagram for me, because I want the strength of these abstract planes that kind of define the space. So in terms of the organization of the plan, it's worth considering whether these doors should really maybe happen on this. This is a gallery, I suppose. But think about the side you really want to privilege and use, because these are going to be different than your shelves, and they're important surfaces to kind of explore further. I really like moments like this, where you kind of slip through a tight corridor and discover an amazing space. And I think when you draw a plan, you should be very wary of corners like this, because that's a bad dead end condition where nothing happens. So, think about entering a space like this and really using every bit of floor plate you have to the best of your advantage possible.
I thought we'd caught all those dead end corridors. They have a way of sneaking back in here and there. Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Oz, for sure.
If we have
Yeah,
any more final comments.
I think the blue surfaces that Oz just traced are kind of the key thing, and they aren't necessarily located exactly there. And I would argue that the program behind or within those walls needs to be as attenuated as it possibly can be, so that those chunks of program can be those walls. And Yeah, I couldn't agree more that the screens feel completely superfluous to the project. You really want to create an open space between this pinwheeling of program walls. The challenge then becomes, how do you get all the shelving in there without it becoming a distraction? But that's the challenge of the project.
Yeah, I mean, maybe rather than one central gallery, it's a bunch of skewed galleries that really relate to those walls, and then the shelving is kind of the field throughout.
You could even imagine, having the shelves primarily, in a zone like this, and the program elements are tighter in there somehow. So that the program elements define the central space and the shelves are kind of behind them. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities.
These are really great precedents to work off of.
Yeah, they're the gifts to keep giving, I think. I've tried to winnow it down to the ones that work well. And I think, to your credit, Chester, you really did study this building. I do feel like you understood it not just from the standpoint of one of the plans, but of the whole kind of material palette of the building, and you really tried mightily to kind of introduce some of the atmospheric qualities of the spaces and not just the plan diagram. So I would say good job with that. And don't leave the Kunsthaus behind. It will serve you well on many future occasions.
I also appreciate,
not
Wendy,
at
that the
all.
person. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, some of those blue areas that were just talked about, like looking at that differently now, I think it opens up like even more aspects of the precedent that, after a second time around, like you look at that and you go, okay, well, there's like a whole different slew of possibilities. You can go from just those suggestions. So that's kind of makes me want to, revisit this and see what other path the precedent can take.
That's what final reviews are all about.
Yeah, I hope you noticed that around the edge of the building, the light coming through the ceiling is natural light. I think you probably know that. And
Right.
So if you have these moments of natural light coming in, maybe you don't remove the ceiling. Maybe the ceiling keeps moving under a light monitor. So there's just a portion of the ceiling that glows much more brightly than other areas. And that could be a really beautiful thing, especially if you could read that whole ceiling scape when you walk in. It'd be really amazing. I appreciate, Wendy, that the person with my same last name was assigned to Zoomthor.
They all picked from a heavily curated list, but they all picked two precedents, so I can't take full responsibility.
We have something in the office called the Daily Zoomthor. We have to look at a Zoomthor project every day.
Not a bad practice, you could do worse. You could do worse.
Do you put on classical music as you do that?
No, if only we were that gathered here. We're a hot mess. It's usually more like punk or something. But yeah.
Zoomthor is very ecumenical in his musical taste, I think, but he actually loves jazz. I think that's his main thing. Anyway, okay, great work. Thank you, Chester. We're going to move to Aaron's project next, which is just down the road. Right here.
Hi, I'm Erin. Starting off with the artifacts, I kind of chose like sculptures that they're all like some sort of abstraction. And then my precedent is Palace of the Assembly by Le Corbusier. And from that, the main elements that I was focusing on was like that main margin that runs along the three sides. The spacing of the walls that support the large curve on the outside, and then the offset circle space in kind of the middle. And then in translating that into my plan, I used like that margin to pretty much dictate where my back of house space is. And then I also like reoriented it so that the curve would be like where the entry plaza is. And then I also lowered those shelves down to kind of let in more light along the entryway. And then the dense like column grid, I kind of wanted to make that mimic almost the columnar grid feeling in the actual president, where they're like almost touching the ceiling and you kind of get like disoriented when you're in the middle of those shelves. And then carving out like the main sections where like the entry exhibit spaces, and then down the hallway into the offset circle, which I use as my main gallery, and then back out into the shelves. So yeah.
And she actually has a pendentive dome for those of you who've been seeking other kinds of
The small ones, but yes.
roof or ceiling structure. It had a huge dome actually, and we kind of suggested simplifying that profile. Not
Sorry, I'm just looking around.
How does the abstract artwork and sculptural forms, how do you think they inform your project?
Well, they definitely, well, I guess the form of the precedent plan in a way, I kind of use that like abstracted diagram as like the direct layout and circulation. And then going back to the artifacts, exaggerating the like painted trees as a main gallery exhibit piece. And I actually like exaggerate those so that they're similar to the columns. And then having smaller pieces kind of just throughout the spaces, mostly on like the entryway where you see those pedestals that kind of lead you back.
Well, I like the organization of your project a lot. I like the clarity of, you know, this band of back of house and leaving the larger space for exhibition and shelving. And I like the play between the spacing of the shelving and the height of shelving as a way to kind of influence the experience and think about things like natural light and so forth. I do find the central gesture to be too dainty. It's I assume again these things are kind of being driven by the requirement for amount of shelving, but this gesture I think could be a much larger thing that encompasses much more underneath it, right? Like you can arrive at a space that connects to that skylight, but your overall roof form and volume of space that you're creating can be much bigger in relation to this plan. So that there's kind of a special experience of being between shelves, but having this massive dome thing above you, and then arriving at a usable space, a main space that's also part of that. So when you go from precedents like this, where this is just such a dominant form with so many things sort of latching onto it and strengthening this diagram to something this small, you should kind of step back and think about what more you can get out of this moment. Without giving up program, you know, there's ways to push this to go further.
every review, a reviewer says, or yeah, every reviewer in every review always says something that I'm just kicking myself. Why didn't I think that? And that's bingo. That's one for sure. I mean, what a brilliant idea, because you know, it would be a reversal of what Corb did, right? So the space at the bottom is huge. You know, it really dominates that courtyard space. But
Yeah.
then, you know, it kind of narrows to the top. So if you understood the way that I did, Aaron, what Oz was saying was that the small gallery in plan at the bottom, which is necessitated by needing so many shelves, you can't have a huge cylindrical space. But the idea that the that the kind of dome or circular skylight above it could be much bigger and even offset from, you know, centralized, centrally located, not just centrally located. Brilliant. I love it. We talked a lot about the necessity with this project of the cylinder being off center. I feel like that was a really intentional, even ideological statement by Corb that, you know, this is no longer an absolutist government. It's, you know, it's sort of, so he pushes that central space off center. So we talked a lot about that in plan, but the idea that you highlight that notion of it being off center by having the dome maybe center is even, you know, more powerful. It's really cool.
And then it's interesting to look at the way Corb still has service spaces be part of that overall form. So when you look at your bathrooms, for example, it can start to hint at the overall form above by not being something rectilinear, but something that sort of defines the edge of this gesture, right?
That's really neat.
I'm drawn to the different spacing of the shelves in the front area here. And I noticed that you violated the no windows rule. And it kind of makes me wish that the front wall of your project was here, and that somehow you were entering under a roof in between these fins before you ever entered. And the idea that you use this spacing to create a more open condition at the entry than you have in the more congested parts of the interior, I think is really nice. I think another thing you've done really well is in many cases, or at least one really clear case, when you're moving through kind of a route of circulation, you're able to see out. It's one of your nicer perspectives. I would encourage you to, you know, think about the same thing here, you know, or maybe there's a hall in between these two program pieces, and this window is able to kind of be at the end of the hall. This idea that, you know, you're in this very these tight spaces, and sometimes you find these beautiful round gallery spaces, but when you kind of cross over one of these routes that's meant for kind of movement across the whole plan, you can kind of see outside. I think that's a really nice thing to be able to give people, and would be in stark contrast to being kind of lost in the shelves over here, right? Where there's solid stuff at either end. You can't really see out of the project when you're in that zone. You know, Oz already mentioned it, but I think this is the first project we've seen that has the back of house stuff along this edge. And I think that to me is really smart. I know context was not a big part of this project, but that's going to leave much more of this front wall open for some sort of an experience, even if it's something that you only experience as you wrap around to kind of come into a conference room. It would be a way, you know, even if this was all glass from here to here, it would be, you know, and you saw these things as objects in the space from the street. You would, you know, it would still allow a lot of privacy on the interior of the archive, while we're letting people where they occupy the space have a more generous experience. But I'm pretty convinced by the way you've organized everything, and you know, think some of the renderings are really pretty strong, especially that one where you're looking down between the shelves outside. It's really nice.
Aaron, do you have any thoughts or questions for the crew?
I really like the comment about kind of mimicking what I did where you can see all the way through the plan with that open window, and doing that for the other hallway as well, coming through like the back of house space. And then for the roof comment, I think like that's really interesting, and I like the programming kind of going back to the precedent, and almost like inverting that. So I think that's really interesting, and I wish I had more time to play with that idea of like the roof line, and then also like extending out. I talked to Wendy about this, and it kind of got like we kind of just like run out of time, but building out onto that entry plaza and kind of blending the entry with the outside a bit more is also something that I would have liked to expand on. So I appreciate these comments. They're very helpful, very kind of in line with what I was hoping to go with. So yeah,
Nice work.
Very nice work,
thank
Erin.
you.
Okay, we're gonna try to do, unless anybody's desperate, we'll do 2 more projects before the break, or 1 more. And how are y'all feeling?
Fine.
Great.
I have to make sure I have enough power. Hold on. Yeah, I should last. I have to go get a charger at the break. So
Okay. All right. Well, let's do at least 1 more, and then we'll check in with you, Matt.
I think I'm good. I'm at 41%. I'll keep you updated.
Okay. The next project is Jessica's.
Hi,
Hi. How are you?
I'm good. Okay, I guess I'll start. My president was OMA's Park La Valette. We spent a lot of time planning our doing our plan diagrams and eventually incorporating our different rooms. I designed my entry space to be an open area with seating that almost forces you to visit the gallery space, displaying my artifacts. One of the things that I really emphasized in my plan was the opportunity for mobility. I wanted there to be paths stretching from the front to back spaces of house in every direction, with an accompanying door on as many sides as I could. I really just wanted it to make my plan more accessible. And I was really attracted to the grids and the precedent. And I think that's where I came up with the idea to, like, especially on the bottom left corner, you can see that there's a main path right there. That's kind of like, it kind of brings the shelves at an angle. That's what I drew directly from the precedent. So I guess mobility was kind of my main goal.
That Park de la Valette plan is just insane.
Yeah.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself wishing he'd won the competition? I do.
Oh, definitely. Did they come in second place or something like that?
I don't know, but I think that a lot of people feel it was, that the best scheme didn't necessarily win. I hear people talking about the OMA scheme as much as the Shimmy one.
Yeah.
Yep.
The catalog of second place winners over the years is some pretty strong work.
Yeah, the B-side, right?
Jessica, I guess in my mind, like what are some of the key things you took from the precedent that you tried to do in terms of how you organized the plan?
Okay. Well, definitely
the
that.
elevator speech.
Yes. Well, I definitely took that main path that was actually like a road, and I made that a walkway. And another thing that I took from the precedent was the big rectangular space, and that's kind of central to the precedent. And instead of keeping that rectangular space, I kind of flipped it and made it shelving and put all of the back of house around it, like right around where the rectangular space would be. So the space between the gallery and the back of house. And I also created my gallery kind of based on some of the visual features of the precedent. There were a lot of like circular elements below the rectangular area, and that's kind of how I got my inspiration for that. And I replicated that in the entry as well, that circular. You have to zoom in a lot if you want to see it. You can actually see it in the final layer too, but there are these two circular elements below the rectangular space.
I guess I'm curious about this gesture in relation to your entrance, because what's clear about the Parc de la Villette plan is that everything's about how you move through the space, right? But it's all about where you enter and where you exit, and creating a clear path through it all with lots of side diversions and different options. But you've set up these really strong gestures that seem to address the backside of the building, if I can call this the backside, instead of engaging your entrance and being kind of a slice through space that relates to where you come in and where you exit. Can I erase all these stupid marks I just made?
You can just hold down Control Z.
Okay. So can you explain that a little bit, like this diagonal gesture and shelving that sort of engages that, and all the kind of focus that's gone into this area versus entry and sort of sequence of space? I want to better understand that.
Of course. Well, I guess if I'm talking about like the main path and the diagonal shelving, like on the far left in the back of house, I wanted it to kind of graze the office space and allow some mobility through that, and allow some accessibility into the gallery space. But I didn't want from the entry space to the back left corner past the receiving. And I didn't want that to be like a direct shot through it. I wanted you to actually have to go through I'm literally forcing you to go through the gallery space. And I wanted you to take that main path to go up if you wanted to get back there, or go straight up past the bathrooms from the entry space. I wanted to kind of wanted to force the person to go certain directions, if that makes sense.
It's funny that you say that, but also say that your project was about accessibility.
Yeah.
You're trying to do two contradictory things, which could be interesting, but the plan doesn't really distinguish between what makes this a different experience and path versus this, right? Everything's the same scale in terms of what circulation is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could push and pull on this a little more so that there's sort of greater definition of what path is through the project and what that intention is.
Yeah, I think the thing that's so has been so important about OMA's work over the last however many years now, 50 years, is it's kind of the way that different layers of thinking are kind of transposed over each other, and your precedent's definitely an example of that. Typically there's a idea about structure or construction that is one kind of vein of thinking. There's typically a really clear idea about program and the arrangement of program, and sometimes surprising or unusual adjacencies of program. And then, as Oz already mentioned, there's the kind of layer of circulation and how you move through the project. And a lot of their work, especially their early work, is really clear and being able to, recognize distinctly those three things. And so I think a lot of what we've been talking about so far, would build upon that. And to me, your project is very close to being organized programmatically in a very simple way. If you think of this as an object here, this is an object, and this is kind of programmatic thinking. and this little dude floating over here, you would then have a distinct zone of shelves that runs, through here, a field of shelves that, kind of lives in this zone. And you're then carving out kind of special moments from that. The circulation layer is what's missing for me. And to me, if all the projects I know from OMA, you would pull some move like a big diagonal slash through the plan that connects the entry to this big field of shelves to the small field of shelves in the back, cuts through this programmatic object, slides through the edge of this important space, so that there's this one big move that allows you to kind of skirt along the edge of or engage each of these moments in some way. And you'd be really overt with kind of having those layers of thinking be in a plan very distinct from each other, but very engaged with each other in the experiences they actually create. And so that to me is the thing that's missing. It's very similar to what Oz was saying about how, this experience over here is going to be very similar to this experience right here, and why. You really want to kind of create that big move. It's so hard, and when you look at OMA's work, especially in plan, to kind of make sense of it. A lot of their projects are like that. But it's really those three things: the idea about how the building's constructed, the idea about how programs organized, and this kind of how we then move through it to kind of connect the dots.
And they've conveniently sort of diagrammed that for you already at the top, so you really understand the layers they're working with. But they also allow for a lot of variety of experience within that park. So I wonder if you could introduce breaks in these shelves so that people can sort of wind their way around. It's much like their follies, but it's moments where if you're walking along here, you can suddenly take a shortcut and do this and do this and make your way to here. So breaking up the rigidity of this suddenly creates all those other sort of paths and works to your idea of accessibility, right? Because right now, if I'm stuck in any of these rows, I have no way out and I will feel imprisoned. But suddenly, if you start to break these shelves up at random almost, it becomes a much more interesting experience.
I think those are great comments. Do you have any questions, Jessica?
Not particularly. I mean, what you guys said made a lot of sense, especially the part about breaking up the rigidity of the plan. I mean, if I did have more time to do this, I would probably like cut through, like create a path, cut through the middle, make it more accessible. I guess my previous form of thought was that the accessibility would be kind of manipulated using more doors than normal. But I guess if you have to cut through all of these rooms to get to the other side, then it's not really that accessible, or as accessible as I thought. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, obviously your precedent is operating at such a different scale. It's a little bit like the no-stop city. You're trying to organize a building with the same sort of spatial strategies of circulation organization that are happening at a much larger scale. And then on top of it, you've got all this very solid program to juggle. So it is a challenge. I really like the suggestions though about the kind of, now that you've kind of established this very rigid and clear diagram, how to make these kind of alternative meandering paths by cutting very selectively, not huge swaths, but selective openings in the shelves. I think is great. I also really like the idea Matt's idea of, kind of almost having this idea of the back of house space over here, wherever that would occur, kind of impacting the division of these two chunks of back of house space, so that you might have, I'm drawing in white, that's not the best. So that almost like the division between the two back of house spaces would have almost, kind of started to pick up and reflect on that. Is that what you were kind of talking about, Matt?
Yeah. Well, and that same diagonal, ooh, you're drawing in Zoom now. That's fun.
Yeah.
That diagonal also would clip just the edge of this important space. So you're not brought through the middle of it, you're brought right along the edge of it. And just with that simple move, you create this one kind of circulation route that has all these surprising engagements of the special things in the project with one simple move. It might even not accidentally, I'm kidding, clip the corner of this thing, so it's like it really kind of touches everything as it goes through. And the only way into these program spaces would be from these walls, and otherwise they would look completely mute around the perimeter of the rest of it.
I love all those comments. It puts me in mind of the great Colin Rowe, who said, generally with architecture, you have to first establish certainty, which means, I would say, clarity of diagram, which I think you've definitely done. And then you have to selectively reintroduce uncertainty, which has to do with some of these, it's almost kind of like interfering or interrupting the clarity of your diagram, but not to the point where it falls apart, where the diagram falls apart. But it's seen as almost a leitmotif or a kind of secondary theme of the plan organization. So I love that kind of set of suggestions. Does that make sense to you, Jessica?
Yes, thank you so much.
Very good. All right, we're gonna do, how you doing there, Matt, with your?
Oh man, I think I'm doing great.
All right, we're gonna do one more and then we'll take a break. So the next project is Ethan's, and he's going to tell you about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all started with artifacts. So I kind of took a look at the list of artifacts that Tulane has, and found some that I liked, and I kind of went with a wood theme a little bit besides the cast iron vase. But I don't know. I really have liked boats, and like I've grown up around boats, and antique boats were just always a cool thing. So when I got the chance to draw one, I got pretty excited. So that's kind of the main piece of my exhibit. For my precedents, I had the Sana School of Design and Management, or the Zollverein School of Design and Management, and then the Diamond Museum. And I really like both of them. They both kind of introduce kind of free-flowing plans. One's a lot more orthogonal, one's a lot more has to do with curves and kind of spaces. They both have like kind of enclosed spaces, but that are still open. So I tried to stick with that. My Sana ended up being stronger, so that's the one I went with. And you can kind of see I have like almost like pockets of gallery spaces, or like rooms that like back of house 2, just placed like throughout the plan, just dispersed throughout space. And then some of them were gallery spaces, some of them were back of house spaces. And then over the gallery spaces, there would be skylights. You can see it in some of the, in one of the sections and a couple of the perspectives, to kind of highlight what I want people to be looking at for the most part.
This guy really looks like a boating enthusiast.
Yeah, we were joking with him that, like, it was a little bit starting to look like a boat show, but don't put ladies in bikinis in your rendering. I don't even know. Is that a 70s thing? Do they even know what I'm talking about? Do they have boat shows anymore and car shows?
I'm sure they do.
They still have them.
Yep, they do.
Hey, Ethan, real quick, what, just a few questions about the plan. What's this space?
That would be a gallery space.
Okay,
Kind of like a mid-sized gallery space. There's a smaller one, and then the open space in the middle would be the
okay, there,
largest.
and then the boat space.
Yeah.
Cool. And then what's this space here?
That's kind of a multi-purpose room. It could be a meeting room, research room, storage. There were a number of kind of back of house spaces that we had to include. So that room, I made it as a research room, but all I put there is a table and a counter. So it really can be multi-purpose.
And it looks like in your renderings, you show some openings in the roof. Where did those occur?
You can see them in the sections. There's 3 of them. The sections only show 2 of them, but they would be right above the 2 gallery spaces that are enclosed, and then above the boat.
Okay. It's interesting in the. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. You can see all 3 of them in that one rendering.
Right.
Edge of one, and then the others. I think you've done like one of the previous projects, a pretty nice job with the entry where you come in and you're faced with one of these objects that you've put in the space. I do think the way you've drawn, I would imagine that this would also be shaded gray, and there'd be a lowered ceiling condition there so that you really read that as an object. Them moving around it and having the main central space be right behind that, I think is also nice, because you have to kind of move around to either side of it, forcing you to kind of be aware of the object nature of that piece at the entry. And in general, the way the program's organized, I think is fairly strong. You should draw lines above, like dashed lines, to help us kind of understand where openings occur. So, how big is the opening over the boat? Is it that big? Is it more of the shape of the boat? I mean, there's so many options there. So it's a little hard to read those things. If I look at the kind of spacing and figure ground of the objects, the galleries and the back of house stuff that you've put in, I think they're well arranged and in relation to each other, and the central space seems scaled nicely. What doesn't seem as clear to me is just the orientation of the shelving and the location of it, and when it, why sometimes it stops here or stops here or here. Here we seem to start having a space, but the orientation of the shelves around the space doesn't seem to really reinforce the space-like nature of that little zone. That stuff seems much more chaotic to me, and I think your precedent project, the Sana one that you said you ended up favoring, is much more clear about the kind of different, if you want to call them field conditions. I use the word field because a field is any area of similar quality, basically. It's much more clear about those zones, and I feel like your shelf network is kind of chaotic. And we've seen this a lot today. Lots of dead ends. Sometimes shelves are on walls. Sometimes they're just off walls. Sometimes they hit walls when they're perpendicular. Sometimes they don't. So I think all of those choices also feel a little inconsistent. But it could be, just to kind of build on that, just like you have a big object here that has a open space associated with it, it could be interesting to have, with every object, have some sort of an open space, so that you end up, the shelves, instead of reading like fields, they start to read like these thin zones in between spaces. So they're more of a network. Right now it's kind of stuck somewhere in between. This one here, you'd probably have the open space, go in this direction. So that every time you have an object, you have a kind of complementary void with it.
Well, and the distinction is also that the sauna project has two kinds of objects, right? There's the really solid objects that come all the way to the roof. And then there's the more glass enclosed objects that are really like a space. So assuming that these glass walls are really not much of a barrier, that can be your space, and this can be your space. But then there's a series of elements that want to go all the way up to the roof and be distinctly different. Right now, when I look at your section and your renderings, everything's kind of held at the same height with very subtle distinctions. But in section, it would be nice if some of these things went all the way. And having done so, they can enjoy their own kind of private oasis of light or whatever, but none of that light really spills into this space. But you're creating chambers within the larger enclosure. So right now, I think the organization of the plan is great. I totally agree that the shelving is a little bit all over the place. Like you could really introduce more paths and think about why the orientation changes. But I think a play between what is kind of solid within this plan versus what is a void and a volume of space that's to be experienced can also help to, in essence, if all your shelves are held low, they would be a lighter color in this plan. And then the things that extend up and meet the ceiling become the darker pochade element, which would be a very different reading of this plan. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Remember, Ethan, you didn't show your many diagrams that preceded this, but like, did you always have the shelves running in two different directions, or were there certain early on, were they all running in one direction?
I believe that in this concept, they were always running in both directions. In other of my concepts, I had them all in the same direction.
Yeah. Well, I can understand how, like, in trying to essentially replace what I was taught to call the MAZ, or milling around zone, that really dominates the Sanaa project, with shelves. In other words, making the solid void. A decision would have to be made about, the orientation of the shelves. Space doesn't have an orientation, but shelves do. And I think the thinking was, for some schemes like No Stop City and others, there was a clear grain to the precedent running in one direction or the other. But with this, that was definitely not the case. So I definitely understand why you kind of shifted the orientation of the shelves, but I also can understand the comments that make it seem like we don't understand why they're changing orientation when they do exactly. It almost makes me want to go back and kind of see what would have happened if, for example, you just simply took, since it's such a strong square grid, even though they defy center and so forth in terms of space, and just sort of have, kind of blocks, start with blocks of shelves that run in one direction, then they run in the other direction, then they run, almost in a herringbone pattern, and then just start carving out from there. So there would always be this kind of point in time in the history of the diagram where you could harken back to why are they that orientation in this part of the scheme. But that said, I actually think that, the success of your project for me is that you've introduced a kind of like, everybody had to have 4 elements. Shelving, packed shelving, the forest of shelves, the clearings in the shelves, which are the gallery spaces, and then the back of house chunks. And I think that, you really picked up on the Sanaa scheme that has these floating solids, which become voids in your project, but then there are these intermediate kind of enclosed elements, which don't really belong to either category. And I really appreciated the fact that you kind of introduced that fourth category of space of it's sort of a room, it's sort of a clearing in the shelves, but it's somehow on the cusp of those two things. To me, this is one that really did internalize not imitate your precedent. I think so. In that sense, I think you really did understand the categories of space that it has and translated that into our program pretty well.
Hey, Wendy, this just made me wonder, was the design of the shelf given to students?
More or less, yes. I think they even got a Rhino template, didn't they, Evan?
Yeah, early on, the spacing was predetermined, 2 foot wide shelves with 3 feet spacing.
Because a project like this that's very, what's the right way to say it? It's very democratic in terms of orientation, like neither X nor Y seems more important, which is very much like all Sana's work. You could imagine just a field of 2 foot by 2 foot towers where the objects they're like these glass towers where the objects are on shelves inside those towers. And then there's neither orientation is more important. But if they were given to you as they have to be linear in their orientation, then that kind of precludes that.
Yeah, there was a lineal square footage and a surface area square footage requirement, both, right, for the shelving. I guess if it had just been lineal, they could have just made these tall towers of shelving, but area designated too. Yeah.
Then you get to count all 4 sides as lineal. That would be against the rules, but.
Yeah, I guess, probably the most, I think it's almost too direct, which is why I wouldn't choose it, but probably the second Herzog and de Meuron Ricola warehouse is probably, the one with the yarrow leaves, probably, the closest to what this building type is. It's mainly like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or something. And then you get these certain moments to punctuate it, with either secondary program or gallery, these gallery spaces. It's very much like, it is much more like a Home Depot than it is a museum, because there's so much storage that needs to happen.
I'm thinking about the things that are punctuated in a Home Depot. The power tools section is always special. The also where they make the cabinets is always special.
Consultation area which is never staffed. Someone to help.
The paint counter is always a standout moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there's customer service at the front, right? Yeah. And I mean, I think that, but that kind of high-low architecture idea is something that I didn't write this project, but I really love it. I think that that our colleague Adam Modisett really intended to be kind of, this sort of high-low thing, not a museum. It's not a museum. it's some hybrid between a warehouse and that's why it's called the Two-Lane Depot and not the Two-Lane Archive or the Two-Lane Museum or something like that. So there's a degree of monotony, in the kind of mass storage of all these artifacts that you kind of, you don't even really want to escape from because that's sort of the nature of the beast. Anyway, thank you, Ethan. Good work.
Thank you.
I think we have time, do we not? Evan as always reins me in. As you know, I'm a woman of excess at times. But I think we have 10 minutes. Can we do 10-minute break?
Definitely.
All right, so we'll come back at 11:15. That's a 9-minute break.
That's good.
See you soon.
Thank you. Richard, are you with us? Hi, Richard.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Let's make
Yeah.
sure all our reviewers are back, but I wanted to make sure you were ready.
Oh, okay.
I think, let's see. Hey, Oz, I see you're back.
Hello.
I see Matt's stage, but not Matt. Richard is our one fully remote student beaming in from China at like 3 a.m. So
You don't want to have him go first?
yeah, well, I considered it, but it didn't work out that way. All right. So Richard, why don't you tell us about what you're doing here? You want to talk about whatever you want, however you want to introduce this.
Oh, yeah. Hi, my name is Richard, and I'll start with the artifacts that I chose from assignment 3.1. So these three artifacts are not like super like related to each other, but for me, I see it as a chance for me to like learn more about the city of New Orleans throughout this course. So yeah, these are the three artifacts that I chose. And then my president was the one from Elder Van Dyke, the sculpture pavilion. I was really like inspired by the way he aligns the curves with the straight lines. Just the way like the whole atmosphere feels like really unique and also like tidy. So I was trying to like uh, incorporate his idea to my own design. Uh, so that's my plan drawings. I kept like two curves for my plan drawings. So the one on the top right, the curve is served for as the front desk. So when the person like enter my depot, so he or she will like see the curve, the front desk first, and then the other curves serve as a like a gallery area for maybe one of the important like artifacts. Yeah, and yeah, I think that's it.
So I'm struck by something in the precedent and your diagrams that I wish had carried through in the project. And that's really how curves play off of each other to create space. So it's something that reads very clearly in this diagram. And then your study where, you know, when two curves come together, a space like this is made, or when two curves are back to back, a space is made. I think as you sort of got into the project, you lost the strength of what these curves can do for you. It's become just sort of small fragments that don't really inform the gathering places you're making within the plan. And I think that's a bit of a shame. It's a missed opportunity. There's nothing that's making this space really special. You know, I wonder why is the curve not the thing that defines this space when it's such a clear organizing principle of both your precedent and the diagrams you've done. Now it's become just they're almost like afterthoughts in this plan. The other thing that I see clearly in this diagram is that there's sort of a poché space all around that defines this initial curve. And I think there's an opportunity here in terms of how you organize your back of house space to consider the sort of front of house you're creating through the shaping of your back of house. So right now it's kind of distributed throughout your plan, and it's not really helping reinforce a concept for you. They're just kind of all over the place. So can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. So I definitely like see curves as one of the most important elements for my project. But like throughout the design process, I think it was because I couldn't figure out like how to both maintain the good amount of like shelving and also like to arrange it with like the curves. So I think that's the reason why I only have like 2 curves left.
Yeah, I think you could have been more aggressive about that. Like, for example, the ends of the shelving could actually be shaped to create a curve for you, right? And create a space for you. So when I look at the juxtaposition of these shelves, for example, sorry, I've lost my place. You know, the fact that these are kind of all stepping in and out, I wonder why can't this actually form your curve, for example, and form a space associated with it. So to say that the curves are the most important aspect of your project, it hasn't really kind of lived up to that in a sense, because they've just been, and I understand the struggle of trying to fit as the program we're given. That's kind of always the challenge, right? We have way more program than we have space for. And in our practice, we're always struggling to carve out little spaces that people can still get together, talk to each other, have special moments, even though the client is constantly demanding that you get as much efficiency as possible, minimize circulation, hack as much program as possible, keep costs down as a result. But our challenge as an architect is to fulfill that program, but always really strive to be creative about the ways we still manage to make special spaces amongst all of this. So it's an ongoing challenge for all of us, but you have to be mindful of that and be creative about the ways that you still manage to get more out of this footprint.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. One other thing I notice about the precedent is that the kind of grain or direction of the straight walls is all in the same direction. And, you know, I really would have picked up on that. I mean, I think that there would be the potential to, you know, have, if this is the overall kind of form of the project, to have all of the back of house stuff kind of grouped together in one big rectangle along that north edge. And then all of your shelf is just this super clean move like this. And it's the interruptions in this that start to create spaces, or at the wall, you know, where one of these things happens, it creates the entry. And I know you were given a shelf to work with, but it doesn't seem like a big leap to, you know, start curving the shelves. It seems like you've already done it here in your plan, right? Where this reads like a continuous shelf with a curve on the end. But you know, it would have been, you would have, this is like one of those rare cases where I would encourage you to more literally study the precedent and look at the way, as Oz already said, the curves are used to make space, because it, you know, when you say that the curves are the most important thing in your project and you're left with just these 2 little curves that look like they highlight one artifact and the front desk, which itself doesn't curve, it feels like you've definitely lost your way on what you're trying to do. I think this is almost every project we've seen today has these little pods of support program kind of scattered throughout. I think this moment, like getting this all into one edge, is so important to your project, because you really need a uninterrupted field condition of shelves to begin to manipulate with these curves to create surprising spaces.
I completely agree.
Efficiency to that, right? You don't lose all this circulation space because it's all in one column. And as a result of that, you gain space and you can start to carve and mold and do other things.
I completely agree. I mean, we were discouraging, you know, what happened was when the program came, everybody did just kind of do bubble diagrams and then everything else was just left over. And so we did discourage kind of lumping it all together irregardless of their diagram, you know, and tried to get them to incorporate it in it. But I think this is one where, you know, that might have been actually very expedient. And I'm just wondering if it seems like, Matt, you're saying that that piece would not have followed the kind of grain. And I wondered if, you know, maybe it could have, so that it was more, it was the last piece.
Where are you drawing right now?
I'm drawing right to the right of his plan.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. I could see the support stuff on either side.
Back of house. Yeah, that's right. You move through a kind of almost threshold, sort of solid zone.
Yep. Yeah, that could be cool to move through the solid zone into that. I could see it on this side. I could see it where you've drawn it. I mean, lots of options. And it's, you know, you can also make spaces on this wall where, you know, two of these things kind of part like this, and you end up making a space that has a view, you know? I mean, there's kind of an infinite number of ways you could use this simple device.
Yeah.
Once you've made it. And the other thing that exists in that, in the Alder Van Eyck plan is there's, I don't know if you noticed, there's even in one place, there's a circle that doesn't quite close on itself. Oh, shoot. I just drew it, but then you moved.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's good. This little guy right here, right? He's like a little anomaly. So like once you make a big space, maybe you start to introduce other little weird things in there that are also shells, right? So there, it's not just the line with a, you know, with a little skip stop in it, or whatever you want to call that. It's you have, once you've made those spaces, you have ways to create other objects in there.
I just want to point out in a little bit of the series of translations where that loss of the curve came from was, as you can see in that diagram form on the top right, where it was a literal. And so we were encouraging adding more shelves. And in doing so, we were saying that to keep the curves, but the curves clearly got lost along the way. So it's something that you guys are making a great point, can easily be reintroduced.
Yeah, neither the precedent nor the diagram has enough density, you know, of the storage areas. So when Richard introduced this diagram, we're trying to, you know, suggest ways that he could double up or triple up the density, you know, but still follow the diagrammatic kind of clarity that he had, because that was clearly very faithful to the Alder Van Eyck precedent.
Well, I'm going to draw on the concept board, just looking at the, oh wait, I thought I was going to draw on the concept board. Jeez. You know, just looking at the plan diagram, it would be very easy just to insert shelving.
Yeah.
In between, and not interrupt the spaces that you've made, and kind of get to your shelf count, you know? Yeah. Which is different than what we just drew, Wendy. It wouldn't be every row has these skip stops. It's really like every other row or every third row.
Right.
And then the other ones have interruptions so that the space can feel like a thing.
Yeah, and also like what you're suggesting here, things like where Alder Van Eyck does kind of almost insert what, you know, you could interpret as a bathroom or some back of house space.
Oh yeah, this guy here.
You know, it seems like that can also trap some of those back of house elements.
Yep.
I think the main thing that is so clear to, I think, all of us, Richard, and probably by now to you too, is that the one thing about this precedent, I mean, you can change the number of curves, you can put them in different places, you can make them bigger or smaller, but the one thing that just can't go away is the element of your diagramming of it that is, you know, it's got a one-dimensional grain, you know, moving in one, there's no cross grain with this thing other than with the kind of shelf, the shelving, or the curving of the wall, but that's not even, you don't have any linear elements running this way. And so that's where there's a really big disconnect in a way from this diagram to this plan. And I think, with more time, we could have gotten that back under control. I know Richard lost a chunk of time in, the critical last couple of weeks, and it just, he did incredible work to kind of catch up and complete the project. There was a lot of kind of back and forth and massaging and development of the diagram to the plan that just kind of didn't happen as a result. So I think with that said, it's really creditable to you, Richard, how much work you've done in such a short amount of time. I mean, 3 weeks isn't enough for anybody anyway, and you really only had a week and a half. So it's amazing to me what you were able to pull off in that shortened amount of time.
Yeah.
And Wendy,
Oh,
one
thank
thing I'm
you.
realizing that's really a lot better about what you drew than what I drew is when the grain of walls is parallel to the service zone, you can start carving those half circles out of the service chunk. That's really nice.
Yeah, you might even do it on the other side. So there's like a private little, lounge or whatever that faces the water for the employees. It's
Yeah.
not open to the public. Well,
Yeah, I mean, you see in the Van Eyck diagram that like within that poche outer ring, he's got suddenly a circle embedded
Yeah.
within that. That's this space to be discovered. It's a great drawing. I love it. I've never seen it.
Amazing plan. I love it. And
It's
these were this was in the category of the sort of visionary plans, but this was actually built. It was a temporary structure, like a pavilion, but it was in fact built.
I could see a more of an elliptical cut that makes it through the whole thing. And that's how you get into the back of house stuff.
Mm.
So there's this one special space that has a view out, and it's the only way into the back of house, so that this edge otherwise is pure.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I can see it on my concept board, but it's not. I've got to refresh the concept board on my laptop so that we can.
Oh, sorry.
That's a cool idea. Do you understand what the criticism is about, Richard? Do you have any?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's my responsibility to really think about how to arrange these curves. Even though with the requirement of number of shelving, but there are still ways to interpret these curves. So yeah, I really take responsibility for that.
Okay. All right. Well, but great work still. I mean, and really some beautiful graphics, beautiful drawings. Good work. You made it. All right. So I'm actually going to refresh my concept board because it doesn't seem to be there. But Evan, are you ready as soon as we get this back?
I am.
We all laid awake, and not last night, well, I did, and prayed that concept board wouldn't crash on us. It's been kind of a little finicky lately. But so far, so good.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
So, hi, I'm Evan. My design for my archive was influenced by an illustration from ARCH1012 No Stop City. The main takeaways from the No Stop City precedent were the underlying grid system and then the interruptions in that grid that were produced with repeated geometries that were also put in elongated forms. When developing my drawings, I kept these elements in mind. I used shelving as my underlying grid system. The introduction of the back of house spaces and front of house spaces were implemented in such a way that they conform to the grid system, but could still be recognized as interruptions. Much like the interruptions in the No Stop City illustration, these interruptions are long and narrow, and my exhibit spaces also follow a similar system, except in the form of voids. And within these exhibits, there are these half ellipses that promote exploration through the space. And these half ellipses were also influenced from a specific instance in the ARCH1012 No Stop City precedent. Sorry. Moving archive goers through the space was done subtly. The only form of natural light comes in the form of sunroofs, which are only above the 6 exhibit spaces. This highlights and entices exploration through space just because of the light, and the spread out placement of back and front house spaces entice viewers to look around corners and go to the archive as they see fit, since the shelving and exhibit spaces are otherwise obstructed.
What are the curved elements doing?
They are 8-foot high walls that would have the artifacts, taller artifacts hidden inside the curve, and just promote movement throughout the space.
So they're kind of protective enclosures for the artifact?
Right, exactly.
Rooms within rooms.
I think the one thing when I look at your renderings that really stands out about them is so, one thing you should always look for in your work is in plan, those curved walls appear to be the most significant things because they're formed differently than everything else, and they are in the middle of or on the edges of the openings in your plan or the larger spaces in your plan. So they seem really important. When I look at the axon, when I look at the sections, when I look at especially the lower right rendering, they're shorter. They aren't distinguished in a material way. They don't seem to have a specific relationship to the light that's coming in that would make them more important. And they lack the kind of hierarchical dominance that they have in the plan. And I think that inconsistency is really kind of a problem in the project. I think if they are intended to be these kind of light scoops or these moments to highlight specimen artifacts in the midst of a much larger collection, that wall thickness, material engagement with light monitors, the height of them and the scale of them, the ability to see them from across the room sometimes, if if the shelves were to be lower, I think would all help a lot with the scheme. I think that said, the kind of spacing of them, the location of them, I feel like the sequence of kind of circulation you would engage to get from one open space to another and kind of experience these scalloped walls. I think that's all working really well. It's just their kind of development into a three-dimensional reality that doesn't seem to make them as important as they would be or want to be.
Yeah, I think about it in these terms. If I were to take them out of this plan, would I miss them? And I wouldn't, because the spaces you're creating are not about these curves. They're kind of diminutive gestures. I think the plan organization is great, and the sequence of kind of solids and voids and so forth it's very rigorous but well thought out. And I love that you've kind of attempted a landscape design outside of the building that sort of extends this idea out. But yeah, the curves just seem superfluous right now. You should certainly push it one way or another.
This is one I definitely have to take responsibility for. He had more curvilinear elements earlier on, as you can see in the diagrams, and he was very close to completion. When was it that we spoke? Was it last Friday, Evan?
It must have been, yeah.
Something like that. And so the curves have gone away, and everything was obviously incredibly well worked out and organized and rigorous. And, and I sort of said, oh, are you missing those curves? Do you need a little something? And for better or worse, he listened to me and inserted them back in. But I agree that, and it's probably my fault that they're not fully realized as much as the rest of the project is, and that's just the fact, because chronologically they came back probably too late for them to be fully, engaging the rest of what's going on. But I'll take the rap for that.
Well, it would be interesting to think of them. I mean, when I look at your diagram, these curves are actually the shelves as well, right? Like the grid of hatched items is equally applied to curved elements as to the squares. So if I were to come back to this plan and give these curves the same thickness and poche as the shelves, suddenly you're sort of creating moments within storage that are special, but it's still part of the overall system, right? And I think that's what's much stronger about the diagram you made than the current plan. So maybe just play around with that and suddenly thicken up these curves and think of it as storage. Because you can have a display of shelves and display an object in front of it, and the two things can talk to each other, and it can become more powerful than a singular piece stuck inside a curve.
Yeah, and for me, this is another one where the openings in the roof would play a role. I mean, I think in a space that's otherwise not only artificially lit, to have the only sources of natural light kind of be affiliated with these curved walls would be really interesting. I would start just by taking them all the way up to the ceiling, pushing them, 4 to 6 feet above the roof, and have these really interesting half moon shaped holes in the roof, and these crescents that are oriented in different directions, so that throughout the day, as the sun moves, you'd end up with these, really different qualities of light in each of them. Some times a day, certain ones would be brighter than others. It could just be this really incredible kind of change in the space and display in the space as the day moves forward.
I was going to try to go find the image, but I won't interrupt our flow of the I'm sure you all know it, the Ronchamp side chapels, Corb's Ronchamp, that were curved, and they reach up and have these light monitors that break up through the ceiling of the space. That would be a great thing to look at, Evan.
I agree. No, I completely agree. Yeah, no, I could have either been removed or played with a little more had I had time.
I think they're sort of in a state of becoming, I don't regret that you tried it, but I do agree that it's almost like they're coming into a play that's the third act of a 4-act play, and everything else is so developed and so clear and kind of refined and resolved that they're coming off as kind of afterthoughts, and that's what they are. But I still think it's great that you gave it a try, and I think with another week you could bring them in and you would have a much richer project as a result of reincorporating that kind of aspect of your original diagram. So I don't regret that they're there, but I wish whoever had thought about it, bringing them back a little bit sooner.
I think you should take it a step further now and really kind of try to be strategic about where they land and their thickness and relationship, because you're nearly there. And I'm glad they've come back, but they've come back kind of haphazardly. But with a little more time, you can really get it there.
Agreed. Do you have any other questions or thoughts?
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'll definitely revisit this in the future. I'll definitely consider those things.
It's a beautiful project. It's really, really a beautiful project. So I want you to feel good moving forward, for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Next project is Lauren. Are you with us, Lauren?
Yes, ma'am. Hi, I'm Lauren. Or I'll wait for you to pull up my work. Okay, I'm Lauren, and the precedent plan I used was the Diamond Sea Museum, designed by John Hedgestick, because I was intrigued by the way the curved walls cut across the entire plan, just giving the middle more purpose. And so I used that idea for my main gallery, but I gave it more room around the sides of the walls to make the main gallery have like more space and like let the large artifacts it held have more space and like just to accentuate that space. And then I straightened out the walls also more to show like, or to make it easier for artifacts to be like hung on the walls or against the walls. And then I added 4 6-foot by 6-foot skylights above the main gallery to accentuate like the main space with all the objects with more natural light. And then at the corner diagonal of the entrance, I added a really large window and a large skylight above it to kind of have like that light at the end of the tunnel kind of feeling for when you walk in to like make the entrance more exciting for the main gallery. And then I made the second gallery with all the pedestals perpendicular to the main gallery and slightly smaller to mirror the smaller objects that the pedestals would be displaying. And then with the back of house rooms, it was difficult with the orientation of my plan to have like enough room for those, have enough space for those rooms without taking too much away from the shelving space. So I kind of incorporated it like right into the middle, outlining the pedestals to allow them to have more attention than if they were just in between all the shelves. So, and then it also kind of splits up the shelving spaces into 4 different groups where you can decide which group of artifacts goes there based on like where they're from or like the kind of style that they are. So yeah.
So this is the primary gallery. This is the secondary gallery. This is the end of the primary gallery, right? Where you have that special window highlight, and then a sort of a typical space in the shelves, facing back toward the main gallery.
Well, I think the northeast to southwest axis, so this guy through here is a really great idea. And it, the things that I think it does really well are it brings you, because you have a destination that I think would actually be really beautiful. It kind of gives you a move, through the plan that's going to draw people all the way through. You've taken a leap that not everybody's done today, which is you've started to manipulate the shelf you were given to kind of create these special shelves that not only create little gallery spaces along the way, but also create an edge for a larger gallery, and everything else kind of hides behind it. And I think that is really, really very smart. And, it'll be successful to the extent that these spaces are good and this is very special at the end. And I think you could definitely work on both of those things and make them better with time. But the kind of organization necessary to make, to have that potential is there. I do think the entry is a little underserved. This feels, just kind of crammed in the corner. It might be that you end up with a more generous space like you have down here at the entry, very different than this kind of culminating space, but just a little less less hemmed in. I wonder, you've probably tried lots of different options, but I would have probably tried a scheme where the back of house stuff is in these kind of triangles in the corner. And the reason for that is I do think that this cross axis is it has problems. It means that the center of the building is kind of setting up to be the most important thing, which you haven't made it that way. This actually, I don't think would be a great center. And it means that hierarchically, this kind of northwest to southeast axis, competes with the main one that you've made, especially since it has little artifacts in it as well. And I don't think that's necessary for the project to have kind of a cross axis, especially when there's only one real entry and one real kind of culminating moment that you've made. That would also allow all of the shelving, between the service stuff and the special shelves to just be this monotonous kind of linear crop row sort of experience, like a true archive. And I think would be a much clearer diagram. But it's to me, it's a really interesting project. I was hoping that somebody with the John Hayduck, by the way, it's pronounced Hayduck, precedent would choose the diagonal just to kind of see what happened. And you did it, and turns out it actually yields some pretty interesting results.
Yeah, I really like the organization, the clarity, and the kind of special experiences that you've created within it. I actually don't mind the other axis, but I want to understand how it's different experientially. Like if the main axis is about all these spots of natural light, and the kinds of objects that you would display in natural light, maybe the other axis is about darkness and the sort of things you display in dark lighting conditions. And I think there's an opportunity to use the back walls of your back of house spaces, because you've very intentionally created blank walls that face the gallery axis. So in essence, it should be a different kind of gallery, right? It's about portraits and things that are mounted on those walls, and a different way to highlight those elements. So it's not the same kind of pedestals in the middle of space gallery. I think you can push that there's kind of a dialogue between these two axes and a different set of experiences. And in the same way, I think when you get to the end of that alternate axis, you should think about the space you create and what the destination is, because that one seems to terminate just into a corner. No, it could be just as special an experience to sort of reach that end. So that's something that could be pushed further. But overall, I think it's really great as an organizational sort of strategy, and there's a lot of different sort of experiences set up within it. It's efficient. I think it's a really nice project.
Thank you. I also definitely agree about the other corner, because that could have been, since there is a space there, that could have been cool just to like incorporate something else as well. But for next time,
I don't think you don't want to compete with the other one. I completely agree with the comments, but I mean, it could have been as simple as just, peeling back the back of house space on alternate corners. You get a fight sort of orthogonal symmetry. It could have been just something as simple as that,
Yeah.
So that, or maybe a little bit more, so you have sort of mini galleries at the ends. It's a tough balance, because you don't want to compete with the primary gallery and axis. But yes, I agree. You just kind of hit that corner and get repelled like a ping pong ball.
You could also pull the special shelves, wrap them down the sides of those of that alternate axis. So they, I don't think my board, by the way, is working because it's not storing what I'm drawing. So what I said earlier probably made no sense. But if these started to pull down the wall, like of the secondary axis, that could be interesting. I like the idea of it being a totally different experience, where the main axis is very light filled and contoured, and the secondary axis is thinner and more kind of linear and dark, with kind of pronounced moments of task lighting almost.
I completely agree. I love the way that both Oz and Matt have described that contrast. And I think your two perspectives here, the top left and the lower left, do show that kind of difference of space, but it could be pushed even further. In other words, it almost makes me wish that the darker one, the one on the bottom, is even narrower and darker, and maybe the pedestals become, kind of blocks, attached to the wall, so that, because there's not room to circulate around them, because you make it narrower and darker. And then I think that the particular width of this one is not going to seem as kind of almost equivalent in terms of the gallery experience as the one below. So just, in other words, heightening the contrast between the two a bit. Not a lot.
I think it's easy to imagine a really light-filled gallery. It's like something we see all the time. But like one precedent of a very dark gallery space is the Zinc Mining Museum by Zoomfloor. You should look at the interiors of that project. It's astonishing how dark it is. But then they're much smaller objects that are displayed in there that are lit artificially, but they look like jewels. They're really beautiful.
Yeah, he has one room like that in the Kunsthaus too. Most of the galleries are these huge, glowing, kind of almost ethereal light spaces, large, very few artifacts in them. But then there's this one room at the corner of one gallery. You step up into it. Have you been? And it's like all black. I mean, you literally almost kind of, lose your sense of bearing because your eyes are oriented to the light galleries. And it's just this one piece that's spotlit in the center of this kind of cubic, square-shaped small room that's black. It's black on every surface, and then the one piece is kind of spotlit, and it is very jewel-like too.
And it works into the kinds of objects you're displaying because curators hate natural light. So like sculptures do well in natural light, but other artifacts want to be in darkness and super controlled conditions. So depending on where your depot has headed in terms of what's being displayed, you kind of benefit from having both worlds.
Yeah, it's really true.
Hey, Wendy, to answer your question, no, I haven't been. And I also haven't met Peter Zoomthor at his studio. So thanks for rubbing it in.
I have.
Someday.
Well, it makes you feel any better. I was so struck dumb. I know that's almost impossible to imagine Wendy being rendered speechless, but literally I'm embarrassed when I think back on it because I was just like, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
I'm usually not, kind of, I don't know, moved by fame or anything, but that's different.
Yeah.
All right. Very nice, Lauren. Good project.
Thank you.
Not an easy beast to wrestle to the ground. Very brave to go with the Diamond Museum. I think you pulled it off for sure. All right, Joaquin.
Yeah, I'm here.
You are up. I'm just gonna get over here. All right.
Okay. So hi, my name is Joaquin, and for the president, I chose Parc de Ville. The first thing that caught my eye on the president was the shape of it and how you can see it, that it's like two-parted. Like there's an upper part and a down part, and there's like a line or a segment that is broken into the middle, and that's what I was interested in. So what I tried to incorporate on my design was the shape of it, and that's where I used the a pathways where I tried to create the shape of the building in my plan, as well as I wanted to emphasize movement throughout the gallery spaces, or you can move freely wherever you want. So yeah, that's basically it.
Short and sweet.
Yeah.
Hey, do you mind zooming in a little bit on the plan? My concept board is having issues. Thank you.
You are welcome.
What's the what was your kind of thinking for the location and kind of route of the pathway that carves through the shelves?
So if you you enter, and there's at the middle, no, not the middle, but where the shelves are more distant from the others. That's where I wanted to create like a way that you can go up to like the main gallery space, or you can go down to the smaller gallery spaces and then try to go from to the pathway I created here and go up as well. So you can go either sides.
I think he's talking about this, the curve
Okay.
from the site limit of the site, and then he kind of took some liberties recently.
Yeah.
That is what I meant. I meant the kind of curving path that carves through the shelves.
Yeah.
Hey, so you can go like, so you can cut like corners. Like if first I had the shelves like all the way from one end to the other, but that didn't help, like because you can go through the shelves, or you can cut any corners and like go to another shelf if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this is similar to what we talked about on the previous project, and you actually did it here. You introduced this circulation route that is from a kind of geometric or formal standpoint, very different than everything else in the plan. And the question becomes, when do you see the path? When do you cross the path? When do you encounter the path? And once you're on it, where does it take you? And so if I just kind of try to trace the experience of entering the space, there's the desk there, and I guess I would move down that wider aisle behind the desk, and then I encounter this path that kind of slices through the shelves. And I think that's where I think the fact that you've done it is smart. I think where it leads and what it does feels like it needs quite a bit more study. I can see that if I walk behind the desk and move to the left, I end up in one of the smaller galleries, which is cool. That seems like a win. But if I move to the right, when I first encounter the curved path, I'm talking about right. I'm drawing in Zoom if you're trying to follow me. Right here, I just kind of, bump right into a wall of the back of house space. And I kind of start to pick something up again here if it was shaped a little differently, which is cool. But maybe this thing needs to kind of, be shaped like this or something. There's like, it's this kind of, doesn't have to close on itself. It can stay open at these ends. But it's a circuit that kind of exists in the plan that allows me to move through all of the important spaces. And breaks up the otherwise, kind of continuous horizontal crop rows of the shelves. I do think that's one thing you've done that's smart is this kind of all the shelves are oriented the same way. That goes back to what we were talking about earlier with OMA, this kind of like really direct way of creating the structure or constructing something. And then inserting these kind of disruptions in it. So I think you've got the right instinct. It's just not yielding the result you want right now. But by the way, this may also require moving around the program boxes some too. I mean, like, those things are also flexible wherever they are, the back of house stuff and support stuff.
I think you're close. I mean, I like the overall diagram and kind of disposition of programmatic elements. It's a space that you want to explore, and you're always kind of arriving at something along the way. But I agree that this kind of diagonal near the entrance is just poorly positioned. And with a little tweaking and really thinking about how you're circuiting and kind of tying these moments in the plan together, it's going to be great. I like this scheme a lot, but yeah, there's just some moments like, the reception desk is set to actually block your path down what seems to be a major circulation zone. Having done that, if it's really about going to the left and right, then you want to heavy up your shelving kind of at this edge of the reception desk, not at this other path right there. So little tweaking like that, I think can really help. And I'm so curious to see views that are all about being in those in these secondary zones. I don't know if any of your views are taken kind of along the curved path, but it might be interesting to see what you're seeing with these kind of diagonal slices of the shelving. And then tightening things like this up where that diagonal isn't yielding anything by the time you get here, right? The point is to get to this space, and that's where it should terminate. So a couple of little tweaks can really strengthen your intentions here in terms of that secondary path.
I think those are really great comments, Joaquin.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think that, the decision that you made relatively recently to sort of take that imprint of the site extent that was really site driven in Paris and start to realize, well, I don't need to be a slave to that because that's about that site, not this one. And so then you start to take liberties. I think you were definitely on the right track. I hope you're hearing that. But it's a little bit like Evan's curved apsoidal gallery walls. It's almost like it came a little too late to really leave that completely and incorporate your new kind of alternate path around the different from one gallery to the next. But I really think that you got some great commentary about that.
And I don't know if this will make sense, but the real advantage to this strategy to me is that I would start with a completely uniform hatch or crop rows of shelves in this space. I would carve the galleries out. And then the only way to get to the galleries, other than walking, weaving your way through the bookshelves, is this path. And then the galleries themselves, that's where you would, as you've already done, you would insert light, and you would have no sense that kind of quality of natural light coming down from above even exists in the project until the path leads you to this space, because otherwise the space is so congested with shelves that you can never see them, right? And I think that's what was so cool about this, this kind of yellow brick road or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. All right, very good work, Joaquin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Helen is next up.
Hi. I'm Helen, and so at the beginning of my project with the artifacts, I was originally inspired by Old New Orleans. So I have a piece of Newcomb pottery, a Tiffany clock that was originally in the Howard Tilton Memorial Library, and a horse winding. And then moving on to the precedent for my actual exhibition, I was inspired by the Palace of Assembly by Le Corbusier. And so at first, I had been attempting to actually use the circular space that really is the emphasis of this building by filling it with shelves instead of using it as a negative space. But towards the end of my project, I realized that a negative space was a lot more useful for this purpose. And I really liked how Corbusier emphasized this circular space in the center and kind of left everything else, all the other important regions, to the perimeter of the project. So I wanted to do that without just placing my back of house spaces along the perimeter. And in terms of how people would move through my exhibit, I wanted to not have such a grand entrance, but kind of have reveals throughout. So you walk through these shelves upon entry, and then you kind of find yourself eventually within the circular negative space. And then even after that, there's the rectangular gallery space that is an additional reveal that wouldn't have any shelves in it, but that would just have more important featured pedestals. And in terms of my back of house spaces, I actually did incorporate windows in each of the office spaces so that in the office you have a view of the Mississippi River.
I'm curious to know why you decided to wall in the rectangular gallery, but not your central space. It's odd to me that the central space is defined by shelving, creating that form, but the rectilinear space is not. To me, it seems like the reverse should be happening, where if it's all about that central space, it has its own kind of structure and logic and is almost cut off from the rest. Whereas shelving lends itself really well to making a rectilinear gallery, for example. Was there an intention behind that?
I did forget to point out that I have a circular skylight right above the circular space, so I felt like that was a good way to emphasize it, and I just wanted to kind of find ways to emphasize both spaces, but not do it necessarily in the same way, like find some differentiation between them, so that would be my logic there.
It would be interesting to try the reverse of this and see what it does for your space.
Yeah, I mean, the way it is, it kind of, there's an all roads lead to the cylinder aspect. And so on one level that, I guess you could argue that makes it more hierarchically significant as a center, because it's a place to it's an orientation room that then, you know, sends you back out to different quarters. But I definitely hear what you're saying, Oz. I mean, I guess the question in my mind is, should either of them have a wall around them or not?
Right.
Either one.
Yeah, like what are shelves doing for you as a structure versus walls? It's not really clear why walls are ever needed then, except for back of house spaces.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, these could be, I guess you would lose some square footage and you know, to the room, but if these were shelves and it was open on either end and these were shelves that just got stopped, I mean, it would whittle down the width of your gallery a bit, but probably not too much.
Or you expand it by going to the next row.
Go to the next row, yeah. But then you have this thing where it's the circle competing with or the rectangle competing too much.
Yeah.
Well, to me, the question's not about necessarily which one's better, because you'd have to really study it to know. It's just, to me, indicates a lack of certainty about how you make space in the project, right? That, you know, you could also see walls here to create a space, very much like this is handled, or vice versa, not doing walls either place. You said that all roads lead to the circle. It feels to me like the only road leads to the rectangle.
No.
The plan organization to me is challenging because it creates a dead end, especially when this is surrounded with walls like this. And it puts an incredible load on this moment and this space to be an incredibly good space. But also requires visitors to kind of turn around to keep using the rest of the interior. I'm also real curious about the near symmetry of things. I mean, this axis is like, you know, 5% north of center. You've got these slight inconsistencies where this is a little further out than that, and you know, this zone down here is a little thicker. But I'm really bothered by that, and especially with the precedent being the assembly by Corbusier, which is not symmetric. You would say it's well composed, and you could probably even argue it's balanced in some ways, but it's not a symmetric form. There are local symmetries, but not an overall symmetry. I feel like it's really uncomfortable how close we are to an axial symmetry here.
And the diagram you have on the top right, where the circle is really pushed off center, like that to me is a much more exciting organization of space. So I totally agree with that comment. It's kind of kind of symmetrical, but then there's all these odd moments that break it. Whereas the way to break it is actually should be about the center space.
I mean, looking at it now, it makes me wonder if I hear everything that all are saying, and it does feel like, I mean, clearly the circle is off center relative to the vertical axis, but it's very close to being on center in the horizontal axis. So feels like it maybe wants to be pushed up a bit, but it also, the kind of difference versus equivalency of these two, clearly the two other galleries, they're clearly different in proportion. I'm wondering if this one wants to kind of just push to the edge and have, you know, have more thresholds of shelves in between the two, because it almost feels like there's a little bit of putting all your fireworks off at the same moment instead of having sort of two big moments because they're so close.
Yeah, you also have the, I mean, I might keep all the shelves moving the same direction, that north-south direction, all the way to the front wall too. So you create a really dense threshold that you have to pass through upon entry, to kind of make that moment of passing into the circle, you know, even more significant.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that you were probably, I know you were pulling off of the change of dimensions or the change of orientation of the one side of the Palace of the Assembly, but when they have the same dimension and kind of density as the other shelves, that reason kind of goes away, and you probably could get a lot more shelves in if they all just stayed in the vertical.
And is it, I mean, this feels like another one where all the support stuff might be better as two bands that go all the way across the north and south walls. So that center, I mean, if you're going to be symmetric or at least have a central zone of things, just go ahead and make it clean.
Pretty close to that anyway, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like these little moments that don't yield much. So it would be better to kind of just intensify this and then get more shelves sort of across here.
Yeah, I think as a general rule, that the thing with the near symmetry is, we actually kind of have a rule in our office: no near misses. Like you either gotta look like you meant to, or make it dead on. You know, I mean, it's like those are kind of the two options. And it's an important one to talk with when you're working on real buildings, talking with contractors. Just sharing that rule early on. They get it. It's like, hey, if we're going to miss, because we're going to miss some things out here. If we're going to miss, we're going to look like we meant to. Otherwise, you've got to make it perfect. You've put that symmetric or nearly symmetric axis just barely off center. And it you know, maybe it's a personal issue in a group setting, but it drives me crazy.
Oh, no, I think we all agree with you.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have any other questions?
I don't think so. I completely understand everything you guys say, and I agree. Now that I'm noticing that, it is driving me crazy too. But thank you so much.
Absolutely. And as with everyone else, you know, the critics are pointing out things that could happen later or in the future. I can't always, you know, don't always need to be fixed right now. All right. So thank you, Helen. We move to our final project. Gosh, we've done great with time.
I haven't had to interrupt at all. You guys are finishing right on time. So
Amazing what another hour will do. We've been squeezed into this, you know, somewhat under 3 hours. Isn't it under 3 hours of class time? 8:45 to 11:40 has been our time frame, and it's hard to get through 13 projects.
Wow, yeah.
It's really hard. Okay, Sophia, take us home.
Okay, so my precedent was the Kunsthaus by Zoom Thor as well. So it's definitely been interesting to see how Chester and I kind of interpreted it differently in the directions that our projects went in. But I chose this initially because I really like the clarity of the design just as a diagram and the solid spaces on the side versus the really big void in the center. So moving from the Kunsthaus to my diagrams, that main void kind of shrinks down and then spawns these like smaller galleries that go more around the edges. So more specifically, those smaller galleries and the items they display, I wanted to really highlight those. So I have skylights, as you can see in my sections, that kind of shine light directly onto the individual pedestals. And then a larger skylight in that main central area that kind of lights the whole space at once. I added in some windows. I also broke the rule on the Mississippi River sides that kind of frame the view, and then designed a plaza on the outside that sticks with the system of shelving and kind of extends it into that plaza with little blocks of planters and trees.
So one thing I see here that I think would really help movement through this space and kind of it's in a sense of fidelity to the precedent is this condition at the ends where the shelves meet walls. I really like the kind of focus on how you terminate a corridor with a window, for example, or this view that you have with glazing at the end of these shelving zones. So being able to look out, that's really nice. But I think, as a user, you would be incredibly frustrated to get to the end of this row and have to retrace your steps. And the Zoom Thor project is all about circulation in this outer band. So I think there's an opportunity to always create almost usable mini gallery spaces at these ends. Maybe you don't want it here because that's kind of your back wall, but being able to kind of hold off from these walls and allow for greater kind of fluid movement through the plan, but then emphasizing sort of what you culminate at the ends of these bands. So rather than maybe doing this at the end of every aisle, it's really kind of what you get to experience moving in that outer band that you focus on as the special highlight.
Are you saying more windows in part?
It's that, in that precedent, that outer zone is really important and it means something. Whereas you're creating a lot of kind of obstruction instead of using that outer zone. I think the disposition of galleries and general circulation is great, but that the weakness is really at that perimeter for me.
Actually, those could be, those ceilings could pop up and be where, skylights are located. That would be another way to handle it. Not to the exclusion of the big center one on the interior space, but these could move to the edge. Does that kind of get at what you're talking about a little bit?
Yeah. And just know that skylights will not spotlight something because light moves through the sky. So you're never going to get light just through that little tiny aperture you've made land on an object the way you want. It might once a day, but the rest of the time it's not going to be where you think it is.
Unless you, pull a banish and banish move and start using mirrors and stuff. But that seems a little too much.
Well, you're going to start burning your collection, I think, if you.
Right. I think that, so if I look at the translation from the Kunsthaus to your diagram, the primary thing I see that kind of shows up is your reading of the pinwheel. I know there's only 3 bars in the Kunsthaus pinwheel, but it's still kind of the way those 3 walls work, since they start shy of a corner and go all the way to a corner in all 3 cases, starts to suggest a pinwheel. And I think you've kind of consistently done it, but if I zoom in on that diagram, if I'm really thinking pinwheel, if this guy's doing this one down here has to do this, and this one here, would do this, and this one, which doesn't exist in the Kunsthaus, would be doing that, right? So you always push to the corner in a pinwheel, and I kind of wish that I can see that you're starting to do that with the program elements a little bit, but I would, again, probably pull them off the wall and kind of bias them in one direction or the other, and make it so that the only way into the spaces is in this gap between the outer wall and each object. That way you never have doors just kind of coming into the space, which is always a little odd. And then the orientation of the shelves, I think, would want to kind of pay allegiance to that same kind of pinwheeling effect, whether you have the shelves in certain places or not. It would really kind of follow that same rule, right? Because I think that's the thing that is really hard for me to follow in the plan you've made, is that you've made kind of a very democratic, or a plan where the orientation of things is not important. I could imagine doing it a lot of different ways and ending up with pretty much the same project. So to me, that's I have a hard time getting past that in the project. I think a lot of the smaller things you've done, as Oz was pointing out, are nice. I do agree that the moment where the shelves engage the wall is really beautiful. Probably the kind of figure grounds, so to speak, of where the gallery spaces are versus the shelves, I think is also really pretty well done. If you do go with a pinwheel, there are lots of other schemes that could start to emerge. Like if this ended up being the diagram for the support boxes, something like this, again, more of a pinwheel. If you had all of the shelves in the middle of the space instead of the opening in the middle of the space, you'd start to end up with your galleries at the edge and the entry here. And that could also be pretty interesting. I mean, it's the cool thing about the power of that simple pinwheel diagram. So kind of inverting your project where the kind of dense chunk of shelves is in the middle, and the leftover spaces, in between the members of the pinwheel and those shelves become the entry and gallery spaces. So it would have a lot of different possible outcomes if you were to think about it that way.
You might have tried that, or certainly some of the Zumthor Kunsthaus people tried, almost like a figure ground reversal, making the big open space in the middle packed with shelves and then peripheral. I think in most cases it turned out that still didn't give you enough shelving space.
Yeah, I think I abandoned it for some reason that I can't remember a long time ago. So it definitely would be interesting to revisit now and see if I can make it work.
Sure. Yeah, I think it doesn't have to just be in the middle, because it probably still doesn't get enough shelf space. I don't even know if y'all can see my concept board is giving me another warning, but if the shelves, that I drew went all the way to this back wall, you're really talking about an object that big, where you get gallery here, entry here, right? So, it feels like there might be a way to make it happen. But.
I don't disagree with a lot of what's been said, but I actually, here's the thing: when you're working from a precedent and you're asked to diagram it and then incorporate your program and transform it, if you're too close to the precedent, people are going to say you're too close to the precedent. You're going to make it your own. And then if it's not like dead on, or there are kind of places where you're removing yourself from the kind of strict organization of the precedent, then you're going to hear about that. So it's like kind of a no-win situation. But I think what I always admired about your scheme, Sophia, was that, and as much as I love this project, the Zumthor Kunsthaus, and the diagram that it represents, is that I actually thought that the way that you introduced, your own kind of spin on it, like the square gallery here, that's not coming from Zumthor at all, but it just seems really well handled to me, so, with a couple of exceptions, like I agree, I think maybe both Oz and Matt talked about that here, like the back of house space is coming to the wall, and then this one kind of doesn't, and maybe it should, I don't know, should slide down and take that corner, I'm not sure. And then a couple of other things about the ideas of doing something at the periphery instead of just having the shelves kind of slamming it. And you had that instinct because that's where you started to introduce these kind of the against the rule window zones, right? And I think so maybe something even more than that, either introducing at least a kind of another small circulation route at the edge, maybe skylights along that exterior wall, something. I mean, I agree with all of that, but I do feel that at a certain moment, you've kind of gotten a lot out of Zumthor, but you've moved on and you're doing some really interesting things that, we can't find a direct corollary for in the
And
present.
it's strong compositionally. I mean, you have a good eye for how to like displace things, but yeah, it's just then kind of really thinking about movement through space and how to tighten up the sort of journey of discovery you've set up.
Yeah, I agree.
It reminds me of like an Annie Albers drawing for one of her.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex plaid, not a grid.
Yeah.
So it's got the pinwheel, but it's got something else to, it's got a few other kind of patterns too. And I think you're actually doing a pretty good job of choreographing them all together. They seem to work well together into something completely new.
Hey, Wendy, in that thing you just drew where that program volume goes all the way to the wall,
yeah.
You're telling me that wouldn't be enough shelves?
What do you mean? I mean, I'm not displacing any shelves except these, and they would be regained over here.
Oh, I don't know if you can see what I drew, but the big orange square in the middle that is left over, if that was all shelves, it seems like it would be enough shelves.
You're probably right. And then you'd also have enough back of house and gallery space too.
Yeah.
But then it would start to look like Exeter. No, I know it's I mean, you could generate almost unlimited number of great building plans projects from even just this precedent, let alone the others. So, but it's definitely worth thinking about. I thought we had, some good conversations during a very tight period of time about figure ground reversals, because so many of the precedents, some of which I chose, some of which were kind of studio wide, are kind of reliant on a surface of open space in which solids are kind of placed in one way or another. And that just, I mean, if you just have to divorce yourself from the relationship or the proportion of solid to void, you have to reverse it to make it work for this program. Which is, if you think about it, kind of a sophisticated idea for a freshman studio.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's a great project and problem.
Yeah.
And great precedents.
Yeah, no, I think they're all solid. You can get a lot out of them. Do you, Sophia, or any of the other students have any kind of final questions or thoughts, comments, anything as we start to come to a close here?
I definitely want to thank you all for your comments. That is super helpful and definitely gives me a lot to think about how I would push this further for sure.
Matt and Oz, you know, you've done yeoman's duty, but if you have any, don't feel obliged. I know sometimes I am like, can't wait to make my final comments. And sometimes I'm like, no, please, I've said all I have to say. So feel free to either leave us with a few last words or not, as you see fit.
I'll let Oz have the last say. I want to jump in before you, so you can have the last word. Just real briefly, thank you so much for having me, and it's been enjoyable and great to hear your input, Oz. Not surprisingly, very useful and good input. I think you guys did a lot of great work today, and we had a lot to talk about. We were able to jump right into the projects, and I know you're glad to be wrapping up the semester, hopefully the last virtual semester for the foreseeable future. Keep our fingers crossed. The one thing, I'll just leave you with one thought about today. The one thing I had a hard time sometimes gleaning from you all were two pieces of information. One, what was kind of the key thing from the precedent that you took from it, and not just what did it look like or what was it shaped like or what was the geometry of it, but like what worked, like what was the thing that made it work, and then two, how you applied that to your project. And what kind of the key things were. And it was there in every case. You drew it and could describe it when asked. But in your presentation, just to make sure you say that very, very, very clearly. I do think part of it's not your fault. The thing with the concept board I've noticed, which I think is a great tool and most schools are using it. But the one thing about it is students have been giving shorter and shorter and shorter verbal presentations, almost to the point where you can't believe people are finished. I think you just got to make sure you're stating very clearly what your intentions were. In a few cases today, I think Oz and I were left in the realm of, well, what would I do instead of responding to something? And so you want to make sure you target our comments on what you were trying to achieve by being very clear about it. But otherwise, great work today. Really enjoyed it. Oz really enjoyed your comments as well.
Likewise, it's nice to meet you, Wendy. Thanks for inviting us. I think this is really a great start for you guys. I'm impressed with the work. I think I would have loved to see more of a connection between these objects you studied and the final product. And I think to some extent, because you're given the same sort of shelving module and everyone's kind of plopping it into the project, that element was sort of missing. Like, how is your archival space specifically different because of the objects you studied versus, if someone's looking at a boat versus someone who's looking at, I don't know, Native American objects, et cetera, like, does that actually start to inform space? And that's asking for a lot in a 3-week project, I know. But if this was to go a step further, it would be pulling those kind of initial top 4 slides into the conversation more. Right now, there's sort of a bit of a kind of pastiche of objects that are dropped into renderings. But that can add a whole other layer of thinking to the architecture you're making. And that really comes next year. So I think you're going to have a lot of fun. This format's been interesting. It's my first review with this, what do we call this board?
Concept board.
But it's kind of nice that we get to draw on it, because I remember, being your age and often sort of hearing feedback where it was just kind of over my head what someone was describing, and critics wouldn't get up and draw on your drawing. So you're kind of nodding along, pretending that you follow. But it's nice to see whether we're right or wrong, and we can be totally wrong, but it's nice to see kind of how we would tweak things or what ideas we're pushing you to explore in more concrete terms. So I hope that despite the pandemic and the circumstances you're finding yourselves in, that this format is at least helping your education. I think it can, but I'm sure you're all looking forward to a return to normal. Thank you, Wendy, for inviting me.
Oh,
and it's very nice to meet you, Matt.
Yeah, you too.
So
Hey,
much. I know how
Wendy.
busy you are. Yes.
Oh.
Hey, Matt.
Sorry, real quick on the concept board thing. So I've still had my students do PDF or kind of storyboard presentations. And then we have the concept board for people to look at afterwards to sketch on. I have found that it helps, it kind of, well, forces, but helps students to tell the story by going through image by image still. And so both, both formats in the same review are possible and can be kind of nice just to make sure they're crafting that story in the way they present it. The downside to, just doing the linear approach is you have to have like a landing page and the images are all too small and you can't really see anything. And so that's why the concept board's so awesome. But just finding a way to get that narrative approach to it still, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably the first semester ever in my millions of years of studios where I felt like the problem wasn't students talking too much. It was like not enough in reviews, in a review context. And I'm not quite sure where that, why that is. And we did talk about that as something to address for the final. Believe it or not, I think that you did hear a little bit more from a lot of them than other reviewers have heard earlier on.
Well, and contrary to what you might think, students, you'll end up doing more talking and writing than drawing when you have a firm. So you got to get real good at it.
Yes, don't lose your verbal skills for sure. You need them. Yeah, I think that whole issue of how to craft a narrative and kind of have a persuasive verbal presentation is something that requires, development, refinement, and work, just like everything else. And like everything else, it gets better and better with time.
Yeah.
But, I couldn't have asked for better reviewers. I thank you both so much. I know how busy you are, and so I know what a huge donation of time and effort this is, and I'm very grateful to you. And I wish you were here and I could take you to lunch or drinks or something.
For me, it was a welcome break from the maelstrom that exists outside this little Zoom room door. So
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, good. At least there's that. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for everybody. Students, we'll see you Monday morning. We'll have our wrap up kind of pep talk and all of that stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.